So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was immune to cyberpsychosis with a divine Sandevistan, Naruto x Lucy x Rebecca. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Chrome-Plated Ghost. The first sensation was not pain, but noise. A monstrous, grinding, unending roar that scraped against the inside of his skull. A cacophony of shrieking metal, distant percussive blasts, and a billion overlapping voices speaking in a tongue that was almost, but not quite, familiar. It was a symphony of a world gone mad, a stark, brutal contrast to the profound silence that had preceded it. He remembered the silence. He remembered the rain, sea king, the carved stone faces of their ancestors, the air thick with the smell of ozone and blood. He remembered the feeling of Sasuke's Chidori, a screaming vortex of lightning, meeting his own Rasengan, a spinning sphere of pure chakra. A cataclysmic explosion of black and gold, a final, desperate collision of two opposing fates. Then, nothing, silence, and now, this all-consuming noise. His eyelids, heavy as gravestones, peeled open. The world was a smear of lurid, pulsating light and deep, impenetrable shadow. Neon kanji, garish and predatory, bled down the sides of impossibly tall buildings, their reflections shimmering in the greasy puddles of a narrow alleyway. The air was a chemical cocktail, thick with the stench of stagnant water, ozone, hot metal, and something acrid that burned the back of his throat. He tried to push himself up, a grunt of effort catching in his chest. A jolt of agony, white-hot and blinding, shot up his left side. He looked down. Where his left arm should have been, there was only a shredded, cauterized stump, the sleeve of his iconic orange and black jacket fused to the mangled flesh. The sight was grotesque, a testament to the sheer, unbridled power that had been unleashed. Yet, the pain, while intense, felt distant, muted, as if filtered through a layer of cotton. Something else was present, a strange, low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate not from the city around him, but from within his own body. It was centered on his spine, a cool, vibrating thrum of latent energy that felt utterly alien. It was not chakra. It was something colder, sharper, more precise. He gritted his teeth, leveraging his remaining arm to shove himself into a sitting position, his back scraping against the rough brick of the alley wall. His head swam, the sensory input of this new reality of physical assault. Flying vehicles, sleek and angular, screamed through the canyons between the towering structures, their lights streaking through the perpetual twilight. The sheer scale of it was disorienting, dwarfing even the grandest buildings of Konoha. This wasn't his world. That much was terrifyingly, undeniably clear. The Valley of the End was gone, replaced by this chrome and neon nightmare. He took a breath, trying to center himself, to reach for the familiar, warm presence of the nine tails within him. He prodded at the seal, the intricate gateway to his partner, his friend. Nothing. A void. The connection, a constant in his life since birth, was simply gone. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him, a far more potent fear than the loss of his arm. He was alone, truly, utterly alone. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the leaf, the child of prophecy, and he was nothing more than a crippled, bleeding ghost in a world that shouldn't exist. A scuttling sound from the mouth of the alley drew his attention. He instinctively tensed, his body shifting into a defensive posture despite the searing pain. Three figures emerged from the gloom, their silhouettes distorted by bulky, mismatched pieces of metal and glowing optics. They moved with a twitchy, predatory gait, their eyes, glowing red slits, scanning the darkness. Scavengers. Even in this alien world, he recognized the posture of jackals circling a wounded lion. "Ho, what we got here?" The lead figure rasped, his voice a distorted electronic gargle. He was tall and lanky, a wicked-looking blade, like a giant praying mantis claw, attached to his right arm. "Looks like someone had a real bad night." "Fresh meat," a second one, shorter and built like a rusty barrel, chuckled. The sound was like gravel in a blender. His face was a mess of crude cybernetics, a metal plate bolted over one eye. "Good chrome on. I am, maybe. Look at that jacket. Cream shit." Naruto's single blue eye narrowed. He didn't understand all the words, the slang was strange, but the intent was universal. He remained silent, conserving his energy, his mind racing, assessing. 3 hostiles. Unknown capabilities. His own chakra reserves felt sluggish, depleted. No Kurama. 1 arm. The odds were laughably poor. But then, he saw her. Further down the alley, pressed into the shadows behind a large, overflowing dumpster, was another figure. She was small, lithe, with hair the color of moonlight and eyes that glowed with a soft, cyan light. She was crouched low, a long cable snaking from the back of her head into a port on the side of the dumpster. A netrunner, he'd later learn the term was. Right now, all he saw was someone else the jackals were hunting. And she was terrified. Her wide, luminous eyes were locked on the advancing scavs, her body trembling almost imperceptibly. Something inside Naruto, a core tenet of his very being that had survived the dimensional transit, clicked into place. He couldn't leave her. He couldn't stand by and watch the strong prey on the weak. It wasn't in his nature. Hey, freak show. Naruto's voice was rough, dry from disuse. He pushed himself further up the wall, forcing himself to stand. The world tilted, but he held his ground, a lone, defiant figure in tattered orange. You want to play? Come and play with me. The lead scav turned, a cruel grin splitting his augmented face. Got some fire in ya, Good. Makes the harvest more fun. He gestured with his mantis blade. Take. I am. The barrel-chested scav and the third, a wiry figure with glowing whip-like appendages, charged. Naruto's mind went into combat mode. He dropped into a low stance, his single hand flashing through a series of one-handed seals. It was sloppy, desperate, but it was something. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He poured what little chakra he could muster into the technique. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a weak, sputtering poof, a single shadow clone appeared beside him. It was a pale, flickering imitation of the real thing, translucent and unstable. The scavs hesitated for a fraction of a second, baffled by the sudden appearance of the duplicate. What the hell? The wiry one hissed. It was the opening Naruto needed. He and his clone moved as one, a coordinated, if weakened, attack. The clone lunged forward, a sacrificial pawn, while Naruto darted to the right, his movements fluid despite his injuries. The barrel-chested scav swatted the clone with a heavy, metallic fist. And it dissipated in a pathetic puff of smoke, but it had done its job. The wiry scav, momentarily distracted, was unprepared for Naruto's real attack. Naruto, moving with a burst of speed that surprised even himself, slid low. His leg sweeping out, aiming for the scav's ankles. His bare foot connected with chrome and steel, the impact jarring. The scav stumbled, his whip-like appendages flailing wildly. Naruto, using the momentum, spun, his right hand, clenched into a fist, driving upwards into the scav's jaw. There was a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The scav's glowing eyes flickered and died. And he crumpled to the ground. 1 down. But the effort had cost him. His vision swam with black spots, and the pain in his side flared with a vengeance. The lead scav just laughed. Not bad, meat. Not bad at all. He began to advance slowly, his mantis blade scraping against the brick wall, sending a shower of sparks into the gloom. But you're running on empty. I can smell it. Naruto staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The barrel-chested scav was getting up, shaking his head, his single red optic locking onto Naruto with renewed malice. He was cornered, beaten, and then it happened. As the lead scav lunged, the mantis blade of blur aimed at Naruto's throat, the world shifted. The incessant noise of the city didn't just quiet, it elongated, each individual sound stretched into a low, resonant drone. The lurid neon lights smeared into long, unbroken streaks of color. The advancing scav, a moment ago a deadly blur, was now moving with the agonizing slowness of a fly trapped in amber. The humming in his spine erupted into a deafening roar, a surge of arctic cold energy flooding every cell in his body. His perception exploded outwards. He could see the dust motes dancing in the air. He could see the faint tremor in the scav's wrist as he committed to the strike. He could see the reflection of his own eye in the polished chrome of the blade, and in that eye, he saw not a blue iris, but a blazing, electric gold. Time had not stopped. It had merely been redefined. And he was its master. He didn't know what this power was. He didn't know where it came from. But his instincts, honed over a lifetime of warfare, knew exactly what to do with it. He sidestepped the slow-motion strike with an ease that felt like breathing. The tip of the mantis blade slid past his face, so close he could count the microscopic scratches on its surface. As it passed, he brought his hand up, not in a fist, but with his fingers extended, rigid as steel. He chopped down on the scav's extended arm, aiming for the elbow joint. The impact was precise, surgical. There was a sharp crack, and the cybernetic arm buckled at an unnatural angle. The scav's distorted face, still locked in its predatory grin, had not yet registered the pain. Naruto flowed around him, a whisper of orange and black. He grabbed the back of the scav's head with his single hand and slammed it forward into the brick wall. The impact was sickeningly solid. The scav went limp, sliding to the ground in a heap of broken chrome and shattered bone. He turned his attention to the final scav, the barrel-chested one, who was still in the process of raising his fist for a punch. To Naruto's altered senses, he looked like a statue. Naruto walked, his steps measured and deliberate, across the alley. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the scav's chest. He didn't have enough chakra for a Rasengan, but he had this. This cold, clean, terrifying power. He pushed. The world snapped back into its normal, frantic pace with a violent lurch. The sound, the light, the motion, all crashed back in on him. The barrel-chested scav, who a microsecond ago was preparing to attack, was suddenly launched backwards as if hit by a cannonball. He flew through the air, his heavy body a missile, and slammed into the far wall of the alley with a sound like a car crash. He didn't get up. Silence. The only sound was Naruto's own harsh, ragged breathing. He looked at his hand, then at the two unconscious, or dead, scavs. The third was groaning, clutching his broken arm. What was that? What had he just done? The Arctic energy receded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a faint, residual thrum in his spine. His golden eye faded back to its normal blue. He swayed on his feet, the adrenaline and the strange power abandoning him, leaving only the pain and the weakness. He slumped against the wall, sliding down to the grimy pavement, the world threatening to go black. "You're not from around here." The voice was soft, melodic, but laced with a cautious, analytical edge. He looked up. The girl with the moonlight hair was standing a few feet away, the cable from her head now disconnected, coiled in her hand. Her cyan eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on him, a maelstrom of fear, awe, and intense curiosity swirling within them. She was no longer looking at the scavs. She was looking at him. At the impossible thing she had just witnessed. What was that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. No one moves that fast. No one. Naruto just stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and pain. He didn't have an answer. He didn't even understand the question. He had survived, he had protected her, but in doing so, he had revealed himself to be something unnatural. A ghost, a monster. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but all that came out was a choked cough. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and the lurid neon lights of the alley began to spin, merging into a sickening vortex of color. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the girl's face, her expression of clinical curiosity softening into something that looked dangerously like concern. Lucy had seen a lot of strange things in her short, brutal life. She'd seen data fortresses that could melt a man's brain in his skull, back alley ripperdocs who could turn a person into a chrome-plated killing machine for a handful of eddies, and pleasure dolls that could fulfill fantasies you didn't even know you had. Night City was a menagerie of the bizarre and the grotesque. But she had never, ever, seen anything like the man in the tattered orange jacket. She watched from the relative safety of her jack-in point behind the dumpster as the scavs had cornered him. She'd been ready to fry their optics. A simple little hack that would have given her a few precious seconds to run. It was a risk. Jacking in from an unsecured point was asking for trouble, but the scavs were a bigger, more immediate threat. She'd been running a low-level data skim from a nearby corporate data line, a simple bread and butter gig to pay for her nutrient paste for the week, when they'd ambushed her. She had been so focused on the data stream that she hadn't heard them coming. A rookie mistake. A fatal one, usually. Then he had appeared, a ghost from nowhere, wounded, exhausted, with one arm. He had stood up to them. She'd almost laughed at the sheer, suicidal audacity of it. When he'd made that strange, flickering copy of himself, she'd been baffled. Some kind of advanced holographic projector. A piece of Militech tech she hadn't seen before. It had been surprisingly effective, for a moment. But it wasn't enough. She had seen him falter, had seen the lead scav lunge for the kill. And her fingers had tightened on her personal link, ready to unleash her demons. And then the world had broken. It wasn't a hack, it wasn't a glitch in her optics. It was something real. For a split second, the man had vanished. He had moved with a velocity that defied physics, that defied the very limits of what flesh and chrome could do. She had a top-of-the-line Kuroshi optics set, CA. Capable of tracking military-grade combat drones. She saw the world in crystal-clear slow motion when she wanted to. But she hadn't seen him move. She had seen him at point A, and then an instant later, she had seen him at point B. With two of the scavs crumpled on the ground. It was like a single frame had been cut from the reel of reality. The power he had used was not the frantic, jittery speed of a typical Sandevistan user. Those were all twitches and after-images, a barely controlled spasm of accelerated time. This had been different. It had been smooth, fluid, impossibly graceful. He had moved not with the fury of a machine, but with the certainty of a force of nature. Now, he lay unconscious at her feet, a puzzle of blood and mystery. Her first instinct, the instinct of any night city denizen worth their salt, was to run. Get away. Don't get involved. The man was a freak, an anomaly, and anomalies attracted attention. The kind of attention that came with corporate logos and heavily armed response teams. But she couldn't. Her curiosity, a trait that had gotten her into as much trouble as her netrunning skills had gotten her out of, was a physical itch. What was he? Where did he come from? And what was the source of that impossible power? She knelt beside him, her cyan eyes scanning him with the precision of a diagnostic tool. His clothes were bizarre, made of a durable, high-quality fabric she didn't recognize. No logos, no brand names. His face, even slack in unconsciousness, was striking. Strong jaw, sun-kissed skin, and strange, whisker-like marks on his cheeks. He was young, probably around her age. But there was a weariness around his eyes, a sense of age that belied his youthful features. Her gaze fell to his back. The tattered jacket had ridden up, revealing the source of the hum she could now faintly feel in the air around him. There, fused to his spine with a seamless, almost organic-looking integration, was a piece of cyberware she had never seen before. It was a long, segmented strip of polished, obsidian-colored metal, with intricate, glowing golden lines that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. It was not bolted on, not dully grafted into his flesh like most of the chrome she saw. It looked grown, as if it were a natural part of his anatomy. This was the source. This was the engine of that impossible speed. A Sandevistan, it had to be. But it was unlike any model she had ever heard of. It was Archaeotech, it had to be. A relic from the pre-collapse era, a piece of technology so advanced that it bordered on mythical. And that presented an even bigger mystery. To use a Sandevistan, especially one that looked as powerful as this, required a massive amount of tolerance. The neural feedback, the strain on the organic body, it was immense. Users burned out, went cyberpsycho, their minds shattered by the sheer G-force of their own accelerated perception. This man, he was wounded, exhausted, but his mind felt stable. There was a calmness to him, even in his unconscious state, a powerful sense of self that should have been scoured away by the use of such a powerful implant. She placed 2 fingers on his neck, checking his pulse. It was strong, steady. She had a choice to make. Leave him here for the scavs, buddies or the city's cleanup crews to find, or take him with her. The first option was the smart one. The second was the interesting one. Lucy rarely chose the smart option. All right, you magnificent, suicidal, impossible bastard, she murmured to herself. Let's see what makes you tick. Getting him back to her apartment was a feat of engineering and desperation. He was heavier than he looked, all dense muscle, and his unconsciousness made him a dead weight. She heaved his good arm over her shoulder, his body slumping against hers, and began the arduous process of dragging him through the labyrinthine alleys and backstreets of Watson. She avoided the main thoroughfares, sticking to the shadows, her head on a swivel. A lone woman dragging an unconscious, bleeding man was just another Tuesday night in Night City, but she wasn't taking any chances. Her apartment was a tiny, coffin-like room in a sprawling megabuilding. One of thousands of identical boxes stacked on top of each other. The only thing that made it hers was the high-end netrunning chair and the custom-built server rack that took up a third of the space. The single window looked out on a vista of other windows, a dizzying array of tiny lives playing out in the neon-drenched darkness. She managed to haul him inside, the door hissing shut behind them. Sealing them in, she laid him down on her narrow bed, the only piece of furniture besides her chair. He looked ridiculously out of place in the cramped, sterile environment, a splash of vibrant, bloody orange in her world of monochrome and cyan. For the next hour, she worked. She was no ripperdoc, but she knew her way around basic first aid. She cleaned the wound on his shoulder, the cauterization from whatever had taken his arm having at least prevented him from bleeding out. She applied a liberal amount of sterilizer and a medical-grade sealant patch she'd stead from a trauma team ambulance a few months back. As she worked, she couldn't help but study him. His body was a roadmap of old scars, faint white lines that spoke of a life of constant conflict. His wasn't some street punk who had gotten in over his head. This was a warrior, a veteran. Her curiosity finally got the better of her. With a delicate touch, she gently ran her fingers along the Sandevistan on his spine. The moment her skin made contact with the cool metal, she felt a jolt. Not of electricity, but of something else. A wave of pure, unadulterated life energy, warm and vibrant, flowed into her fingertips. It was the complete opposite of the cold, dead feeling of every other piece of chrome she had ever touched. It felt alive, and she saw something, a flash of an image in her mind's eye. A vast, green forest under a brilliant blue sky. The feeling of wind in the trees. The scent of damp earth. It was a powerful, overwhelming sensation of peace and vitality, a feeling so lean to the concrete and steel of Night City that it made her gasp and pull her hand back as if burned. What in the hell was he? She backed away from the bed, her heart hammering in her chest. This was beyond Archaeotech. This was something else entirely. The man on her bed was more than just a puzzle. He was a paradigm shift. A walking, breathing impossibility that could change everything. And he was in her apartment. Her mind, a tool honed for calculation and risk assessment, went into overdrive. An asset like this, the eddies she could make, number. That was the old way of thinking. The kind of thinking that got you killed. This was different. Power like his couldn't be controlled, it couldn't be sold. It could only be aligned with, or destroyed by. She looked at his face again, at the peaceful expression he wore in his sleep. A stark contrast to the violence she had seen him unleash. For the first time in a long time, Lucy felt a flicker of something other than cynicism or ambition. It was a dangerous, unfamiliar feeling. Hope. He stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. His eye fluttered open, a sliver of brilliant blue in the dim light of her apartment. He looked around, disoriented, his gaze slowly coming to rest on her. "You're safe," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He pushed himself up on his good elbow, his gaze sharp, analytical. He looked at his patched-up shoulder, then around the tiny room. His mind clearly working, piecing things together. You helped me," he said, his voice still rough. "You helped me first," she countered, leaning against her server rack, crossing her arms. "We're even. Now for the real questions. Who are you? Where did you get that thing on your spine? And how are you not a gibbering cyberpsycho right now?" Naruto looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. "Cyberpsycho. Sandevistan." He shook his head slowly. "I don't understand any of those words." He paused, his gaze turning inward, a profound sadness entering his eye. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. And I think I'm a very long way from home." Lucy stared at him, at the genuine, soul-deep confusion in his eyes. He wasn't lying. He wasn't playing dumb. He truly had no idea what he was, or what he had. He was a child in possession of a weapon of mass destruction, with no concept of what it was for. This changed everything. A slow smile spread across her face. The first genuine smile she had worn in years. It felt strange on her lips. The man, Naruto, was an anomaly. A ghost. But he was her ghost. And in a city of monsters and machines, maybe a ghost was exactly what she needed. Well, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice laced with a newfound, dangerous excitement. Welcome to Night City. I have a feeling you're going to be a very interesting person to know. The chapter of his old life was over, torn away as violently as his arm. A new one of chrome, and neon, and impossible speed, had just begun. He was a stranger in a strange land. A ghost with a machine god in his spine, and his only guide was a girl with moonlight hair and secrets in her eyes. It was a terrifying prospect. But as he looked at her, at the spark of life in her cyan gaze, he felt a flicker of his old self return. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and he never, ever ran from a challenge. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the chrome. The second time he woke, the noise was gone, replaced by a low, persistent hum that seemed to be the baseline state of this new reality. It was the thrum of a million air conditioners, the distant whine of flying vehicles, the electronic pulse of a city that never slept. His senses, no longer overwhelmed by the initial shock, began to parse the data with a grim efficiency. The air still tasted of chemicals, but now he could distinguish the sharp tang of ozone from the greasy smell of cheap, fried food wafting up from somewhere far below. His single eye cracked open, adjusting to the dim, cyan-tinged light of the small room. He was on a bed, a narrow cot that was barely more than a mattress on a shelf. His left side felt heavy. He looked, and instead of a bandaged stump, he saw a dull, gunmetal gray arm. It was a simple, functional-looking prosthetic, the fingers slightly curled in a resting position. He flexed, and the metallic digits twitched in response. The sensation was alien, a phantom limb given crude, mechanical form. The connection felt sluggish, a noticeable delay between thought and action, but it was there. He had an arm again. Across the room, bathed in the glow of multiple monitors, sat the girl with the moonlight hair. Lucy. She was reclined in a complex-looking chair, a thin cable running from the back of her neck to a port in the chair's armrest. Her eyes were closed, her face serene, but he could sense the frenetic activity taking place behind those still eyelids. She was somewhere else. Diving, she had called it. Swimming in an ocean of pure data. He had a vague, dream-like memory of the conversation. Of her cool fingers patching his wound, her voice a calm, analytical counterpoint to his own spiraling confusion. He sat up slowly, the movement pulling at the sealant on his shoulder and the fresh sutures where his new arm met his flesh. He remembered the Ripperdoc, a gaunt man with eyes that saw the world in schematics, his own body a patchwork of mismatched CHR. From a dozen different manufacturers. He'd spoken in a clipped, technical jargon that Lucy had translated, his fascination with the obsidian device on Naruto's spine both unnerving and, strangely, validating. No manufacturer's SIG, no interface port, the integration is seamless, practically biological. It's not just attached to his nervous system, it's woven into it. The synaptic feedback one should have turned his brain into a bowl of soup. This isn't a Sandevistan, it's a miracle, or a curse. The memory of the doctor's words echoed in his mind. A miracle, or a curse. That summed up his situation rather neatly. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cold, polished concrete floor. He was wearing a simple pair of gray synth cotton trousers and a black tank top. His old orange jacket, tattered and blood-stained, was folded neatly on a small shelf, a relic of a life that felt a lifetime away. Looking at it sent a sharp pang of loss through him, a grief so profound it was a physical weight in his chest. It wasn't just a jacket. It was the last tangible piece of his home. He stood, testing his balance. The new arm threw off his center of gravity, but his shinobi training, the ingrained muscle memory of 1,000 battles, compensated automatically. He walked to the room's single window, a thick pane of armored glass that looked out onto a concrete canyon of breathtaking scale. Directly across from him was another megabuilding, a mirror image of the one he was in, its face a dizzying grid of countless other windows. He could see into some F them, a family eating a meal under the harsh glare of a fluorescent light, a lone figure silhouetted against a television screen, a couple locked in a passionate embrace. 1,000 stories, 1,000 lives, all packed together in this vertical hive. It was so full of people, yet he had never felt more alone. He tried to reach for it again, the familiar warmth he had turned to for comfort his entire life. He closed his eye, focused inward, searching for the vast, cavernous space within his soul where the Nine Tails resided. He pushed against the seal that was no longer there, calling out a name into a silent, empty void. Kurama. Nothing. Not even an echo. The silence was absolute, a confirmation of his deepest fear. The being that had been his companion, his burden, and ultimately his friend, was gone. The dimensional transit, the cataclysmic clash of their final techniques, had severed a bond forged in fire and blood. Tears welled in his eye, hot and unwelcome. He was no longer a Jinchuriki. He was just Naruto. And in this world, just being Naruto didn't feel like enough. The loss was a physical amputation, as real and as painful as the loss of his arm. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass, his new metal fingers balling into a tight, powerless fist. Morning. Lucy's voice cut through his grief. He turned. She was disconnected from her chair, stretching languidly like a cat. The cable had retracted into the back of her neck with a soft click. Her cyan eyes, sharp and perceptive, were fixed on him. There was no pity in them, only a detached curiosity. Pity was a useless currency in Night City. Something like that, Naruto said, his voice hoarse. He wiped his eye with the back of his organic hand. Your friend, the one you were fighting? She asked, walking over to a small food synthesizer built into the wall. She tapped a few buttons, and with a low hum, a small, gray brick of nutrient paste slid out into a bowl. She slid it across the small counter towards him. He kill you, you kill him. Seemed like that kind of party. Naruto stared at the bland, unappetizing brick. It was complicated. He looked at her. We both lost. He picked up the bowl, tea. He synthetic material feeling strange in his new hand. He took a tentative bite. It was tasteless, with the consistency of thick glue. He swallowed it down anyway. Sustenance was sustenance. Complicated usually is, Lucy said. Leaning against the counter, her arms crossed. She watched him with an intensity that was both unnerving and intriguing. My turn for questions. The Ripper, Doc Vic, he pat. Shed into your new optic while you were under. Ran a basic diagnostic. According to the data, when you activate, your core body temperature drops by 3 degrees, your bioelectric output spikes by 1,000%. And your neural processing speed becomes, well, the word he used was, unreadable. She tilted her head. What does it feel like? Naruto thought back to the alley, to that moment, when the world had smeared into slow motion. Cold, he said, the memory still vivid. It feels like ice in my veins. And, quiet, the noise, all of this, he gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the city beyond. It all just stretches. It's not that time stops. It's that I have more of it than anyone else. Lucy's eyes widened slightly. More time, she whispered, the concept clearly resonating with her netrunner sensibilities. In the net, time was everything. A microsecond could be the difference between a successful data heist and a flatlined brain. You're not just moving fast. You're perceiving fast. That's why you're not a cyberpsycho. Your mind is keeping up. She pushed off the counter, her mind clearly racing. The implant, it's not just a spinal booster. It's a total nervous system overhaul. It's made you post-human. I'm still me, Naruto said, a note of defiance in his tone. He didn't like the sound of post-human. It felt too close to monster. Are you? Lucy challenged, her gaze sharp. The boy who arrived here had a fleshy arm and a powerful something inside him. The one standing in front of me has a chrome prosthetic and a miracle of military-grade hardware fused to his spine. You've changed, Naruto Uzumaki. The question is, into what? Before he could answer, an alert chimed softly from her computer console. Lucy's demeanor shifted instantly, her casual curiosity replaced by a focused professionalism. She strode back to her chair, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard that shimmered into existence above her lap. All right, Time to earn your keep, Ghost, she said. Not looking at him. Your new arm and the info from Vic weren't free. We owe him. And we're broke. I've found us a gig. A simple one. A milk run. Naruto walked over, looking over her shoulder at the streams of data flowing across her monitors. It was a language he didn't understand, but he could recognize maps, building schematics, and patrol routes. He was on familiar ground here, if not in a familiar world. There's a small logistics depot in the Kabuki district, Lucy explained, her voice all business. Belongs to a noodle corporation. Low security, mostly automated. But they're handling a side hustle. Moving illegal, high-grade cyberware components for a bigger fish. The manifests are stored on a single, isolated data shard in the supervisor's office. She highlighted a small room on the schematic. You go in, you grab the shard, you get out. I'll run interference from a net point nearby. Disable cameras, loop security feeds. Easy. And the pay? Naruto asked. The practicalities of his new life setting in. The shard is worth a lot to the competition. I've already got a buyer lined up. Enough eddies to clear our debt with Vic, get you some real food, and set us up for a week or two. She swiveled in her chair to face him. But you can't go looking like that. You stick out like a sore thumb. Your clothes are loud. And you've got the posture of a soldier. In Night City, that makes you a target. She stood up. First, we go shopping. Then, we go to work. Stepping out of the sterile, controlled environment of the megabuilding's lobby was like being thrown into an ocean of sensory chaos. If the view from Lucy's window had been overwhelming, the reality of the street was a physical assault. The noise was a solid wall of sound, the roar of traffic on the elevated mag-lev tracks above, the cacophony of 100 different languages and dialects, the aggressive, pulsating beat of music from sidewalk stalls, the shouts of vendors hawking everything from synthetic street food to black market weaponry. The air was thick with smells, the spicy aroma of stir-fried noodles, the sharp, coppery scent of blood being washed off the pavement, the cloying sweetness of cheap incense, and the ever-present undertone of ozone and hot metal. Holographic advertisements, some as large as buildings, flickered and danced, their vibrant colors painting the perpetual twilight. A giant, holographic koi fish swam through the air between buildings, its scales shimmering with corporate logos. People flowed around them in a dense, unending river. And they were incredible. A man with 4 spider-like mechanical arms walked past, each hand deftly manipulating a different personal device. A woman with glowing optic cables for hair laughed with a friend whose lower jaw was a sleek chrome construct. Naruto saw chrome everywhere. Polished, military-grade limbs, crude, rusty prosthetics, ornate, golden facial plates. It was as if humanity had decided that flesh was obsolete. A canvas to be carved up and replaced with something better, stronger, more efficient. He felt a profound sense of normalcy. His own prosthetic arm, which had felt so alien in the quiet of Lucy's apartment, suddenly felt mundane. He was just another piece of the patchwork landscape. Lucy, with her understated grace and minimal, high-grade cyberware, seemed almost as out of place as he was. She moved through the crowd with a purpose and an awareness that he recognized. She was constantly scanning, her eyes flicking from face to face, alley to alley. She was a kunoichi in a city of steel. "Keep up, Ghost," she said, her voice a low anchor in the storm of noise. "And try to look like you belong here. Stop staring like a tourist." "It's a lot to take in," he admitted, his gaze drawn to a street samurai cleaning his katana under the garish light of a noodle sign. The blade wasn't simple folded steel, it hummed with a faint blue energy, a monomolecular edge that could probably cut through a tank. "This is Kabuki. The nice part," Lucy said with a wry smile. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Or you'll die." Usually one of the two. They were heading towards a sprawling, open-air market. A chaotic maze of stalls and shops crammed under a massive concrete overpass. It was here, in the heart of the market's din, that their world collided with another, far more volatile one. "Out of the way, gonks. Move it." The voice was a belligerent rasp, and it was followed by the man himself. He was short, but built like a brick shithouse, with a leering, unpleasant face. But it was his hands that drew the eye. They were ridiculously, Comically oversized, massive chrome monstrosities that looked like they'd been ripped off a construction mech and crudely bolted to his wrists. He shoved his way through the crowd, uncaring of the people he bumped and jostled. He was about to barge right into Lucy when Naruto, acting on pure instinct, put his new chrome arm out, blocking the man's path. The impact was solid, metal on metal. The man, Pilar, stumbled to a halt, looking down at Naruto's arm, then up at his face. "The hell's your problem, Chum?" he sneered, his oversized fists clenching. "You got a death wish." Before Naruto could respond, another figure burst out of the crowd. "Pilar, you absolute donkey-brained fuckwit. What did I say about starting shit in the market?" The newcomer was a whirlwind of motion and color. She was tiny, barely coming up to Naruto's chest, but she radiated an energy that was 10 times her size. She had vibrant pink and blue pigtails, eyes that were a startling, almost fluorescent green, and a face that was a perpetual, angry scowl. Her body was a canvas of mismatched, brightly colored cyberware. Her arms were slim, but clearly enhanced, and her legs were powerful-looking prosthetics. She wore a cropped jacket with clashing patterns and shorts that were barely there. She was a firecracker, a stick of dynamite with a short fuse. She stomped up to Pilar and, without hesitation, kicked him hard in the shin. "I leave you alone for 2 minutes to get a fucking drink, and you're already trying to get your ass zeroed again." "Hey, I wasn't doing nothing," Pilar whined, rubbing his leg. "This skinny Chum got in my way." The girl's furious green eyes snapped to Naruto. She looked him up and down, a quick, dismissive appraisal. She took in his simple clothes, his new but basic arm, his single blue eye. "HMPH, skinny Chum," she grunted, apparently agreeing with her brother's assessment. Her gaze lingered for a half-second on Lucy, a flicker of what might have been female rivalry in her eyes, before she dismissed them both as uninteresting. "Come on, Pilly," she said, grabbing the lout by his ear and yanking him away. "We got a client to meet. If you fuck this up for me, I swear to God I will personally replace those stupid fucking hands with spoons." "Ow, Becca, Lego, not the ear," Pilar protested, allowing himself to be dragged away by his diminutive but clearly dominant sister. Naruto watched them go, a bemused expression on his face. "Well," he said, "they were energetic." Lucy was already moving again, her face an unreadable mask, though he thought he saw the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes. That was Rebecca and Pilar. Street kids. Mercs, when they can get the work. All chrome and no brains. Stay away from them. They're trouble. The little one seemed to be in charge, Naruto noted. "Rebecca, she's the dangerous one," Lucy confirmed. "Impulsive, violent, thinks with her trigger finger. Let's go. We're wasting time." They found a stall selling cheap, second-hand clothes and Lucy picked out a dark, hooded jacket, a pair of cargo pants, and sturdy combat boots for him. The change was immediate. The simple, functional attire made him blend in, another anonymous shadow in the city of shadows. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, hero of the leaf. He was just another face in the crowd, a ghost in the machine. And for the mission ahead, that was exactly what he needed to be. The Noodle Depot was a grimy, windowless cube of concrete and steel, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Kabuki. The air hummed with the sound of its industrial ventilation systems, a constant, monotonous drone. True to her word, Lucy found a secure net point in an abandoned building across the street, Sea King in and leaving Naruto to his part of the plan. "I'm in," her voice came, a clear, calm whisper directly inside his head. The Ripperdoc had installed a basic internal comms unit along with the optic and the arm. The sensation was strange, but incredibly useful. "Cameras are on a loop. You've got a 5-minute window before the system reboots. The supervisor's office is on the 2nd floor, northeast corner. There should be 2 guards on the ground floor. They're lazy, probably watching TV. Avoid them." "Got it," Naruto whispered back, his voice feeling loud in the relative quiet. He was rooshed in the shadow of a large dumpster, the depot's loading bay door just a few feet away. The lock was a simple electronic keypad. "All right, try the door now," Lucy said. A moment later, the light on the keypad flashed green and the lock clicked open. Naruto felt a flash of admiration for her skill. She made it look effortless. He slipped inside, the heavy door hissing shut behind him. The interior of the warehouse was a cavernous space, filled with towering shelves stacked high with crates of instant noodles. The air smelled of cardboard and artificial flavoring. As Lucy had predicted, TWO guards were slouched in chairs in a brightly lit security booth, their attention fixed on a flickering screen. They were heavy-set, bored-looking men, their company-issue body armor stretched tight over their guts. Getting past them would be easy. A simple distraction, a burst of speed, but that wasn't the plan. The plan was clean. In and out. No witnesses, no alarms, no bodies. It was a test of control, not power. He moved through the shadows of the shelves, his movements silent and fluid. The combat boots were heavier than his old shinobi sandals, but he adapted quickly, his steps making no sound on the dusty concrete floor. He reached the stairwell at the back of the warehouse undetected. The second floor was a narrow corridor of offices. A sign on the wall pointed him towards the supervisor's office. He crept to the door. Pressing his ear against it, he could hear a faint, rhythmic tapping. Someone was inside. Complication, he sub-vocalized. Someone's in the office. There was a pause, and he could almost feel Lucy's mind racing on the other end of the connection. Damn it. The intel said the supervisor was out for the night. Can you see who it is? There was a small, wire-reinforced window in the door. Naruto peered through it. A man in a cheap suit was sitting at the desk, his back to the door, his fingers tapping away at a computer terminal. This had to be the supervisor. It's the suit, Naruto reported. He's at the terminal. Okay. New plan. Lucy's voice was tense. The shard has to be in that office. You need to get him out of there. Without making him suspicious, Naruto's mind raced. He could burst in, knock the man out, and be gone in seconds. But that was messy. That left a trace. He needed something subtle. He scanned the hallway. A fire alarm pull station was on the wall, 20 feet away. An idea, reckless and simple, formed in his mind. It was a classic, one of the first tricks he'd ever learned. I have an idea, he said. I'm going to need you to be ready to unlock the main entrance at the front of the building. The one the guards can see. What are you planning? Lucy asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. Just be ready. He took a deep breath, and then he tapped into it. Not the full, world-breaking torrent of power he'd unleashed in the alley. Just a trickle, a single, focused drop of that Arctic cold. The world didn't smear into streaks of light. It just hiccuped. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stutter, to stretch just enough for him. He activated the Sandevistan, and in the space between one moment and the next, he was no longer standing at the office door. He was at the fire alarm. He pulled the lever down hard. He deactivated the Sandevistan just as quickly. The return to normal time was seamless. An instant later, a klaxon began to blare, and a piercing alarm filled the warehouse. Red lights flashed, painting the corridor in strobes of crimson. In the office, the supervisor jumped to his feet, cursing. He glanced at his terminal, then ran out of the office, heading for the stairs, completely oblivious to the shadow that had been standing outside his door a moment before. What did you do? Lucy's voice was a mix of panic and awe. Distraction, Naruto said, slipping into the now empty office. He went straight to the desk. The data shard, a small, silver rectangle, was sitting in a port on the side of the terminal. He plucked it out, pocketing it. Got it. Now, the door. Down on the ground floor, the two guards were scrambling out of their booth, confused by the alarm. Just as they looked towards the front of the warehouse, the main entrance slid open with a hiss. They drew their weapons, moving cautiously to investigate the malfunction. It was the opening Naruto needed. He sprinted from the supervisor's office, down the stairs, and across the warehouse floor while the guards were occupied. He moved with a silent, controlled urgency, a ghost in the flashing red lights. He ipped out the same loading bay door he'd entered through, melting back into the night. The alarm was still blaring as he met Lucy a block away. He handed her the shard. She looked at it, then at him. Her cyan eyes wide in the neon-lit darkness. A fire alarm, she said, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across her face. All that power at your fingertips, a machine god in your spine, and you pull a fire alarm. She started to laugh, a genuine, unrestrained sound of pure amusement. You are, without a doubt, the strangest goddamn person I have ever met, Naruto Uzumaki. He couldn't help but smile back. The adrenaline was fading, but in its place was a feeling he hadn't had since he'd arrived in this world, a sense of accomplishment. He had a new arm, a new purpose, and a new partner. He looked at his metallic hand, clenching it into a fist. It still felt alien, but it was his. He had lost his world, his power, his closest friend. But here, in the cold, chrome heart of Night City, he was beginning to build something new. He wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a contender, and the game had just begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Price of a Name. The eddies felt heavier than their digital nature should have allowed. As the anonymous cred chip slid into Lucis' personal terminal, the string of numbers that appeared on her screen was a tangible weight, a physical representation of their success. It was a clean transfer, laundered through 3 shell corporations before landing in their account, courtesy of a faceless buyer who now possessed the shipping manifests of a mid-level Noodle Corporation's illegal cyberware smuggling operation. The numbers weren't life-changing, but they were a deep, satisfying breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere of debt and desperation. Enough to pay their dues, restock their meager supplies, and, for a fleeting moment, feel like they weren't drowning. Debt cleared, supplies funded, and enough left over for a celebratory dinner. That doesn't taste like recycled cardboard, Lucy announced, leaning back in her Netrunner chair. The tension that had been coiled in her shoulders since Naruto's arrival had loosened, replaced by a cool, professional satisfaction. She turned her cyan eyes on him, a flicker of genuine approval in their depths. Your fire alarm gambit was unconventional. But it was clean. No bodies, no alarms traced back to us. The Noodle execs think it was a system malfunction and a random snatch and grab. They'll beef up security, but they won't be looking for ghosts. Naruto was sitting on the edge of her bed, running a diagnostic on his new arm. He flexed the metallic fingers, watching the intricate dance of synthetic muscles and myomer bundles under the dull gray plating. The delay was still there, a frustrating microsecond of lag between intent and action, but it was improving. He was adapting, his nervous system slowly, painstakingly mapping the new territory of his own body. It was a shinobi's solution, he said, his voice quiet. The loudest action is not always the most effective. A whisper in the right ear can be more powerful than a shout. Lucy tilted her head, a small, curious smile playing on her lips. A shinobi, she repeated the unfamiliar word. Is that what you were? A professional whisperer. We were the shadows of our village, he explained, his gaze distant, lost for a moment in a world of green leaves and carved stone faces. Espionage, infiltration, sabotage, and, when necessary, combat. We were taught to be whatever the mission required. A tool, a weapon, a ghost. He looked at his hands. One of flesh and scars, the other of metal and wires. I suppose some things don't change, no matter where you are. A comfortable silence settled between them, a rare commodity in the ceaseless hum of Night City. It was more than just the absence of noise, it was the presence of a shared understanding. They were two solitary creatures, a netrunner who lived in the digit Al ether and a displaced warrior who moved faster than time, finding a strange equilibrium in their shared isolation. Lucy, who trusted data more than people, found herself analyzing the boy in front of her. His shinobi philosophy was a stark contrast to the city's brutal pragmatism. Night City solved its problems with a bigger gun, a sharper blade, a faster piece of chrome. Naruto pulled a fire alarm. The sheer audacity of it, the quiet confidence it bespoke, was more impressive to her than any display of raw power. He wasn't just a weapon, he was a mind. And that, in Lucis' world, was infinitely more valuable and far more dangerous. First stop, Vix, she said, breaking the silence as she stood. We pay the man. In Night City, you pay your ripperdoc before you pay your rent. A good doc is harder to find than an honest politician. Dr. Victor's clinic was a grimy, cramped space tucked beneath a noodle bar in Little China, the smells of antiseptic and fried soy mingling in the air. The man himself was a masterpiece of second-hand chrome, a walking testament to his own craft. He greeted them with a grunt, his mismatched optics zooming in on Naruto's new arm and the SP. OT on his spine where the divine Sandevistan lay dormant. Heard the gig went smooth, Vic said, his voice a low rumble as he accepted the cred chip from Lucy. His diagnostic tools were already hovering over Naruto's arm. No rejection, no neural feedback, fascinating. He gestured for Naruto to sit. Let's have a look at the merchandise. For the next hour, Vic ran a series of intrusive, but painless, diagnostics. He calibrated the motor functions of the prosthetic, shaving precious milliseconds off the response time. He tweaked the interface, making the connection feel less like a tool being held and more like an extension of Naruto's own body. But his true focus, his professional obsession, was the Sandevistan. I've been digging, Vic said, his eyes glued to a stream of biometric data on his monitor. Cross-referenced every piece of Archaeotech from the pre-collapse era. Militech, Arasaka, Zetatech, nothing matches this signature. The energy output, the thermal regulation, it's not just efficient. It's practically a closed system. It generates almost no waste heat. Any other Sandy pushing these kinds of numbers would cook the user's spine like a cheap synth sausage. He leaned back, a look of profound awe on his grizzled face. Kid, that thing on your back isn't just a piece of hardware. It's a work of art. It's the equivalent of finding a lost Da Vinci in a dumpster. He turned his gaze to Naruto, his expression turning serious. And that makes you a target. A big one. News travels fast in this city. A whisper about a new merc who can move like a phantom, who pulled AC. Lean job on a tacky Oshi subsidiary, people will start connecting the dots. And when they figure out the dots connect to a piece of one-of-a-kind, priceless cyberware, they will come for you. Arasaka, Militech, the voodoo boys, they'll kill you and peel it off your corpse without a second thought. The warning hung heavy in the air. Naruto met the Ripperdoc's gaze, his single blue eye unwavering. Let them come, he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. I've spent my whole life with a target on my back. It's the one thing about this world that feels familiar. Vic studied him for a long moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. I believe you, kid. But still, be smart. In this city, a name can be a lifeline. Or it can be a tombstone. Be careful which one you build for yourself. He's right, Lucy said as they walked through the neon-drenched streets of Watson, the steam from 1,000 food stalls misting around them. The ghost who pulled a fire alarm is a cute story. But the merc with the mythical Sandevistan is a problem. We need to control the narrative. We need to build your name, but we need to do it carefully. How? Naruto asked, taking a bite of a skewer of grilled synth protein squid that Lucy had bought from a street vendor. It was surprisingly good, the spicy marinade a welcome explosion of flavor after the blandness of the nutrient paste. By taking the right jobs from the right people, she explained. We need a better class of work. Better pay, more discretion. And for that, we need a real fixer. A good one, which means we need to go to the one place in Night City where legends are made and broken every single night. She stopped, looking up at him, a serious, almost challenging light in her eyes. We're going to Afterlife. Naruto had heard the name whispered in the market, a place spoken of with a mixture of reverence and fear. It was, Lucy explained, more than just a bar. It was the premier social club for Night City's elite mercenaries. To even get in, you had to have a reputation. And to get work there, you had to be the best. It was the top of the food chain. The entrance was unassuming, a simple doorway leading down a flight of stairs in the basement of an old, abandoned industrial complex. But the moment they stepped inside, Naruto felt the shift in atmosphere. The air was thick with the smell of expensive liquor, synth cigar smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of chrome and ozone. The lighting was low, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the sound, reducing the conversations of the patrons to a low, conspiratorial murmur. The people here were different from the desperate gangers and street-level thugs he'd seen so far. They carried themselves with a quiet, dangerous confidence. Their cyberware was top of the line, seamlessly integrated, more for function than for flash. He saw a woman with sleek, silver arms nursing a drink, her eyes constantly scanning the room. He saw a man with a heavily scarred face and a military-grade optic quietly negotiating with a suit in a private booth. These were the true professionals, the apex predators of Night City's urban jungle. To them, he and Lucy were new blood, fresh meat. He could feel their eyes on him, appraising, dismissing. "Don't make eye contact unless you're ready to finish a conversation with your fists," Lucy murmured, guiding him towards the bar. "The bartender is the gatekeeper. Her name is Claire. Be polite." The bartender was a woman with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wiped down the bar with a practiced efficiency, her gaze missing nothing. Lucy ordered 2 drinks, one for each of them. When Claire set them down, Lucy leaned in. "We're looking for work," she said, her voice low. "Something that requires a delicate touch. Heard Rogue might have something on her books." Claire's eyes flicked to Naruto, giving him a quick, professional once-over. She must have seen something she liked, or at least, something she didn't immediately dislike, because she gave a curt nod towards a secluded booth in the back of the bar. "She's in her office. Don't waste her time." Rogue's booth was more of a throne room. The woman herself was an icon of the city, a legend from the old days who had transitioned from frontline merc to the queen of fixers. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a face that showed she had seen it all and been impressed by none of it. She was nursing a drink, a single, perfect sphere of ice floating in amber liquid. She didn't look up as they approached. "Claire says you're looking for work," Rogue said, her voice a smoky alto, smooth and dangerous as black ice. "But I don't know you. In my business, reputation is everything. You don't have one." "We're building one," Lucy said, her tone respectful but firm. "We were responsible for the Takeyoshi manifest theft in Kabuki." Rogue finally looked up, her gaze pinning Lucy first, then shifting to Naruto. Her eyes lingered on him, a long, analytical stare that felt like it was peeling back his skin and examining the machinery beneath. "The fire alarm," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Clever. Not the usual smash and grab mentality of the current generation. But that was a low-stakes gig. Ideal in premier talent, not one-hit wonders. Give us a chance to prove we're premier talent," Naruto said, his voice steady. He met her gaze without flinching. Rogue seemed to consider this. She took a slow sip of her drink. "All right, hotshot. As it happens, I do have something. A situation that requires a certain finesse. A corporate researcher, a man named Anthony Harris, has gotten himself into a spot of trouble. He was doing some off-the-books work, developed something his employers at Biodyne would kill to get back. He's gone to ground in the No-Tell Motel, a scav-infested shithole over in Pacifica. Biodyne has a retrieval team on the way. Your job is to get to Harris first, secure his research, it's on a data shard, and extract him alive." "The pay?" Lucy asked. "Substantial," Rogue said, "but there's a complication." As if on cue, a loud, obnoxious voice cut through the bar's low hum. "Rogue, you old fossil. You got a gig for us or what? My trigger fingers gettin' itchy." Naruto turned to see Rebecca and Pilar shoving their way towards the booth. Rebecca, a whirlwind of pink, blue, and belligerence, had a shotgun slung over her shoulder and a manic grin on her face. Pilar lumbered behind her, his oversized chrome hands clenching and unclenching. Rebecca skidded to a halt at their booth, her green eyes widening in surprise as she saw Naruto and Lucy. Her grin turned into a sneer. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The skinny chum and his emo girlfriend. You two lost. We're working, Rebecca, Lucy said, her voice dripping with ice. Working, Rebecca scoffed, leaning on Rogue's table, completely ignoring the fixer's icy glare. Don't make me laugh. What kinda gig would Rogue give to a couple of amateurs? A coffee run. Rogue cleared her throat, a sound as sharp as cracking ice. Rebecca, your timing is, as always, impeccable. I was just briefing this team on the Harris extraction. Rebecca's eyes lit up with greedy delight. The Biodyne researcher. Heard that was a high-ticket item. Perfect. We'll take it. These two can handle the coffee run. Rogue leaned back, a look of cold amusement on her face. She was a cat, and all these desperate mice were providing her with excellent entertainment. An interesting proposition. Let's make it more so. The job is on the table. The first team to bring me the shard and the researcher gets the full payout. The other team gets nothing. She looked from Naruto to Rebecca, a glint of predatory challenge in her eyes. May the best mercs win. Rebecca's grin was sharp and feral. You're on. Come on, Pilly. We're gonna be rich. She shot Naruto a final, dismissive look. Try not to get flatlined, skinny. It'd be a shame to waste that jacket. With that, she and her brother stormed out of the bar, leaving a wake of noise and chaos. Naruto looked at Lucy. Her jaw was tight, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. A simple extraction had just become a race, and their competition was a pair of impulsive, heavily armed maniacs. This just got complicated, Lucy said through gritted teeth. Good, Naruto replied, a slow, confident smile spreading across his face. I was worried it was going to be boring. The no-tell motel was even worse than its name suggested. It was a decaying husk of a building. Its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti and filth. It squatted in the middle of a junk-strewn lot in Pacifica, a district of the city that had been abandoned by the corporations and left to rot. The entire area was crawling with scavengers, the dregs of Night City, who preyed on the desperate and the unwary. It was a war zone, and they were about to walk right into the middle of it. From a vantage point on a nearby rooftop, Naruto and Lucy surveyed the scene. The motel was a U-shaped, two-story structure, with an open courtyard in the middle. Scavs patrolled the perimeter, their mismatched cyberware glinting in the dim light. Rogue said Harris is in room 207, Lucy said, her binoculars pressed to her eyes. Second floor, back corner. There are at least a dozen scavs in the courtyard. And who knows how many more inside. Going in the front is suicide. Suddenly, the roar of an engine filled the air, and a souped-up, heavily armored car screeched to a halt in front of the motel. The doors burst open and Rebecca and Pilar jumped out, guns already blazing. For the glory, and the eddies, Rebecca screamed, firing her shotgun into a group of scavs near the entrance. Pilar followed, his oversized fists punching through the flimsy wall of the motel lobby, sending plaster and wiring flying. All subtlety, all chance of a quiet approach, was instantly obliterated. Alarms, or at least the scav equivalent, shouted curses and the indiscriminate firing of automatic weapons, erupted from the motel. Lucy let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. So much for a plan. That psycho is drawing every scav in the district to this spot. We have to move now, or that Biodyne team will show up and sanitize the whole block. Naruto didn't panic. The chaos below wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. Rebecca and Pilar were a perfect distraction, a loud, violent, look over here. That drew all the attention. He scanned the building, his shinobi instincts taking over. The front was a death trap. But the back was a sheer wall, but there were drainpipes, ledges, crumbling bits of facade. There the shout, Naruto said, his eyes tracing a path up the back wall. We'll be the whisper. Get ready to run interference. I'm going in. Before Lucy could argue, he was moving. He vaulted over the edge of the rooftop, landing silently in the alley below. He crossed the junk-strewn ground in a blur, reaching the back wall of the motel undetected. The sounds of the firefight in the front were a perfect cover for any small noises he might make. He began to climb. His chrome hand found easy purchase on a rusted drainpipe, while his organic hand gripped a narrow window ledge. He moved with a supernatural grace, his body light, his movements economical. It was like the tree climbing exercises of his childhood, only the tree was made of concrete and steel, and a single slip meant a fatal fall. I'm in their system, Lucy's voice crackled in his ear. It's a mess, but I can see their internal comms. Rebecca is on a rampage on the ground floor. They're drawing most of the heat. The second floor is still relatively quiet. But I'm picking up movement in room 207. Harris is panicking. Naruto reached the second floor walkway. He crept along it, the sounds of battle growing louder. He could hear Rebecca's manic laughter and the boom of her shotgun. He reached the door to room 207 and pressed himself flat against the wall. He could hear a man inside, muttering to himself, terrified. He didn't knock. He took a steadying breath, focused, and kicked. The door, flimsy and rotten, exploded inwards, torn from its hinges. Naruto flowed into the room, a dark, silent shape. The man inside, Harris, screamed. He was a small, balding man in a stained shirt, his eyes wide with terror. He was clutching a data shard to his chest. Who are you? He stammered. Are you with them? With Biodyne. I'm the one getting you out of here, Naruto said. His voice calm and reassuring. Give me the shard. Harris hesitated, clutching it tighter. At that moment, the wall to the adjoining room exploded inwards in a shower of plaster and splintered wood. Pilar, his face split in a savage grin, stomped through the hole. End of the line, Chum. He bellowed, his massive chrome fists raised. Naruto reacted instantly. He shoved Harris behind him, putting himself between the terrified researcher and the chromed-out brute. Get back, he ordered. Pilar charged. He was all raw power, a charging rhino of metal and stupidity. Naruto didn't try to meet him head-on. That would be foolish. Instead, he dropped low, the world stuttering for a split second as he tapped into the Sandevistan. The charging Pilar seemed to slow, his punch arcing through the air with agonizing slowness. Naruto sidestepped the blow, his hand lashing out, not with a punch, but with an open palm. He struck Pilar's knee joint, the one that was made of flesh and bone. There was a sickening pop, and Pilar screamed, his leg buckling beneath him. He crashed to the floor, his momentum carrying him into the far wall. Suddenly, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her shotgun leveled, her face a mask of fury. Get away from my brother, she shrieked, but she didn't have a clear shot. Harris was still behind Naruto, and even in her rage, she wouldn't risk hitting the package. This was the stalemate, the frozen moment that would decide everything. And then the world outside the window lit up with the telltale blue and white strobes of corporate security vehicles. Naruto. Biodyne is here. Lucis' voice was frantic, heavily armed. They're sealing the building. They were trapped. Rebecca in the doorway, the injured Pilar on the floor, the terrified Harris cowering behind him. And a corporate death squad surrounding the building. Rebecca looked from Naruto to her downed brother, then at the flashing lights outside. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, panic, and a sliver of desperation. Her reckless plan had failed, and now they were all caught in the net. Naruto met her furious green eyes. He didn't see an enemy. He saw a cornered animal, fierce and terrified. He had the advantage. He had the shard, the package, and the tactical high ground. He could leave them to their fate. But that wasn't a shinobi's solution. And it wasn't Naruto Uzumaki's way. New deal, Rebecca, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. We get out of this together. My way. She stared at him, her shotgun still raised, her mind racing. Trusting the skin, Ny Chum who had just crippled her brother. It was insane, but her own plan was in ashes, and the alternative was a corporate-funded grave. For the first time in her life, Rebecca was out of options. And the only one being offered was from the last person in the world she ever expected. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Devil's Handshake. The air in room 207 was thick enough to chew. A volatile cocktail of ozone from discharged weaponry, plaster dust, and the sharp, coppery tang of raw fear sweating off Anthony Harris. Outside, the world was a canvas of chaos painted in strobing blues and whites, the professional. Synthesized chirp of Biodyne calms a stark counterpoint to the guttural screams of dying scavs. Inside, time had frozen. Naruto's offer, my way, hung in the superheated air between them. A fragile bridge over a chasm of mutual distrust. Rebecca's face was a thunderous mask of conflict. Her knuckles were white on the grip of her shotgun, her manic green eyes flickering between Naruto, her groaning brother on the floor, and the flashing lights that signaled the end of the game. Her entire life, every instinct screamed at her to shoot her way out, to trust no one, especially not some quiet, skinny Chum who moved like a glitch in the system and had the gall to cripple her brother, however strategically. But her way had led them here, to this trap. Her plan, all glorious, explosive impulse, had crashed and burned. And the corporate vultures were circling. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when her brother was bleeding on the floor. And what the hell is your way, skinny? She snarled, the words scraping out of her throat. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't a no, either. It was a demand for a miracle. Naruto, Biodyne Tactical is on site. They've established a hard perimeter. Lucis' voice was a blade of ice in his ear, cutting through the noise. I'm reading 20 hostiles, military-grade hardware. They're not here to negotiate. This is a sanitize and retrieve op. You have, at best, 90 seconds before they breach the second floor. Naruto's gaze didn't leave Rebecca's. He had more time than anyone else, but even his perception couldn't stretch 90 seconds into an eternity. He had to be fast. He had to be decisive. He had to lead. "Your way was loud," Naruto said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding register that cut through the panic. "We're going to use that. You're going to get louder." He shifted his stance slightly, addressing them all, a commander laying out a battlefield. "Rebecca, you're the diversion. I need you to go to the front of the motel. The side facing the street. I need you to make the biggest, most glorious goddamn mess you can. Every grenade you have, every shell in that shotgun. Draw their attention. Make them think you're trying to punch a hole through their front line." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. It was an order, not a suggestion. And it was an order to do exactly what she was best at. A flicker of her usual manic energy returned. "And what are you gonna be doing? Polishing your chrome." "I'm the exit strategy," Naruto countered, his gaze flicking to the groaning Pilar. "Your brother's a liability. Harris is a non-combatant. While you're the fireworks, I'm taking them out the back." Quietly, he then looked past her, as if seeing Lucy through the walls. "Lucy, I need you to be the ghost in their machine. Mess with their comms. Feed them bad intel. Make them chase shadows." "Already on it," came the clipped reply. "Feeding their tactical lead a ghost signal from the East Wing. He's diverting a fireteam. It'll buy you a few seconds. But this plan is certifiably insane, Naruto. You're trusting a pyromaniac with impulse control issues to be your shield." "She's motivated," Naruto sub-vocalized, his eyes locked on Rebecca's. "Her brother's life is on the line." He looked back at her. "I get them out, you provide the cover. We meet at a rally point Lucy designates. Then we split the pay for the shard. Rogue gets her package. We all walk away. It's the only play we have left." The logic was brutal and inescapable. Rebecca looked at Pilar, who was trying to push himself up, his face pale with pain. She looked at the biodyne strobes painting the walls. She looked at Naruto, at the unnerving calm in his single blue eye. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't scared. He was in control. It was infuriating. It was also their only hope. "Fine," she spat, the word tasting like acid. She racked her shotgun with a deafening clack-clack. "But if you ditch us, Skinny, I will hunt you down and wear your spine as a goddamn necklace." "You got me." Loud and clear, Naruto said. "Now go." With a final, venomous glare, Rebecca spun on her heel. "Pilly, on me," she yelled. "Time to make some noise." Pilar, using the wall for support, hobbled after his sister, a grimace of pain and anger on his face. Right behind Ya, Becca. They disappeared into the hallway, and a moment later, the motel erupted. It wasn't just the boom of Rebecca's shotgun anymore. It was the percussive thump-thump-thump of grenades, the roar of sustained automatic fire, and Rebecca's own feral screams echoing through the building. She was a symphony of destruction. A one-woman riot. "That's our cue," Naruto said to the trembling researcher. He turned to the back wall of the motel room, the one facing the dark alleyway. He didn't bother with a door. He drew his right leg back, channeling his own raw, physical power into a single point. His foot slammed into the crumbling plasterboard. The wall disintegrated, exploding outwards in a cloud of dust and debris, revealing the night air and a sheer drop to the alley 2 stories below. No, I can't," Harris shrieked, looking at the drop. "Incoming." Lucis' voice was sharp. 2 biodyne soldiers at the end of the hall. They ignored the diversion. Naruto didn't have time to argue. He grabbed Harris by the collar of his shirt with his chrome hand, his grip like iron. "Yes, you can." He hauled the man towards the hole. Just as he reached the edge, 2 figures in sleek, black body armor and featureless helmets appeared where the hotel room door used to be. They raised their rifles, the barrels glowing with the distinct blue hum of charged energy weapons. The world lurched. Naruto activated the divine Sandevistan. The roar of Rebecca's assault faded to a low drone. Flashing lights became solid bars of color. The 2 biodyne soldiers were frozen, their fingers just beginning to tighten on their triggers. Wisps of superheated air, invisible in normal time, coiled from the muzzles of their rifles. He saw the trajectory of the coming shots. He saw the panicked, slow-motion scream on Harris' face. He saw the crumbling edge of the hole he'd made in the wall. There was no time to dodge, only to act. He shoved Harris through the hole, the man's body tumbling out into the open air in surreal slow motion. Then, with a strength that was purely his own, he ripped a large chunk of the metal bed frame from the floor and hurled it into the path of the incoming energy bolts. Time snapped back into place with a violent concussion of sound and force. Two brilliant, blue lances of energy slammed into the makeshift shield, vaporizing the metal in a shower of molten sparks. The impact threw Naruto backwards, the force of the blast shielding him from the lethal energy but not the kinetic impact. He hit the opposite wall hard, the air knocked from his lungs. He recovered instantly, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears. He scrambled back to the hole in the wall. Below, Harris had landed in a large, overflowing dumpster, cushioned by bags of trash. He was dazed, but alive. "Okay, my turn," Naruto muttered. He took a running start and leapt through the hole, tucking into a tight roll as he flew through the air. He landed with practiced ease, his legs absorbing the impact, a perfect shinobi landing that barely made a sound. He pulled the whimpering researcher from the dumpster. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "They're reporting an unauthorized exit on the south-facing wall." Lucis' voice was tight with stress. "A spotlight is swinging your way. You need to move. There's a fire escape 50 feet to your left." Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He half-dragged, half-carried the dead weight of the researcher, moving with a desperate urgency. The alley was a treacherous landscape of discarded junk and broken pavement. A brilliant white beam suddenly cut through the darkness, sweeping across the wall above them. They were exposed. A volley of energy bolts stitched across the alley, kicking up chunks of concrete and dirt, bracketing their position. Naruto shoved Harris behind a rusted-out Jenner. Eterin drew his own body up as a shield. "Where's our damn cover fire?" he sub-vocalized to Lucy. From the front of the building, a new sound joined the cacophony. A high-pitched, furious roar, followed by a massive explosion on the street. A ball of fire and smoke billowed into the sky. "That would be Rebecca," Lucy said, a note of grudging admiration in her voice. "She just blew up a Biodyne APC. That got their attention. The spotlight is swinging back to the street. You're clear. Go." Naruto grabbed Harris and sprinted for the fire escape. The metal stairs were rusted and rickety, groaning in protest under their combined weight. As they scrambled down, he could see the full extent of the battle. Biodyne soldiers were taking cover behind their vehicles, returning fire not just into the motel, but at a specific window on the second floor where Rebecca was now silhouetted, her shotgun barking defiance. She had become the sole focus of their considerable firepower. She was buying them the time they needed with her own life. They hit the ground and kept running, plunging into the labyrinthine network of alleys and slums that surrounded the motel. The sounds of the firefight began to fade behind them, replaced by the distant wail of city sirens. Rally Point is 2 blocks north, Lucy guided them. An old sewer access tunnel. It's dry, should be safe for a while. They found the designated manhole cover and, with a grunt of effort, Naruto heaved it open. He helped Harris down, then dropped into the darkness himself, pulling the heavy lid back into place. The darkness was absolute, the only sound their own ragged breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. They were safe, for now. Minutes later, a section of the tunnel wall slid aside with a low grind of stone on stone, revealing a figure backlit by a handheld lamp. It was Lucy. She had already abandoned her netrunning nest and circled around to meet them. Her face was grim, her eyes scanning them for injuries. "Report," she said, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Asset secured," Naruto said, nodding towards Harris, who was huddled against the wall, shivering. "Shard is with him. No major injuries." "And our distraction?" Lucy asked, her gaze turning towards the ceiling, as if she could see through the layers of concrete and steel back to the motel. As if in answer, the manhole cover above them scraped open, flooding the tunnel with the sickly orange glow of the city's sky. A figure dropped down, landing with a clatter of metal and a string of creative curses. It was Rebecca. She was a mess. Her jacket was torn, her face was smudged with soot, and there was a fresh gash on her cheek. But her eyes were blazing with a wild, triumphant fire. She was grinning from ear to ear. "Did you see that?" she cackled, her voice raw. "That APC went up like a fucking firecracker. You should have seen the look on those corpse-suited assholes' faces." Another figure dropped down more clumsily, groaning in pain. Pilar. He collapsed against the wall, clutching his shattered knee. Rebecca's grin faded as she took in the scene. The quiet tunnel, the terrified scientist, the calm efficiency of Lucy. Her adrenaline high was beginning to crash, and the reality of their situation was setting in. She looked at Naruto, her green eyes losing some of their manic fire, replaced by a complex, unreadable emotion. "You didn't ditch us," she said, the words coming out as a surprised accusation. "The deal was we all walk away," Naruto replied simply, meeting her gaze. "My way." Rebecca stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find a response. The cynical, brutal calculus of Night City had no room for this. "You didn't risk yourself for a rival. You didn't honor a deal made under duress. You took the prize and ran." But he hadn't. The skinny chum with the ghost tech in his spine had kept his word. It was the most insane, irrational, and confusing thing she had ever witnessed. She let out a harsh, dry laugh that held no humor. "You," she said, pointing a trembling, soot-stained finger at Naruto, "are a complete and utter lunatic." Lucy stepped forward, her expression all business. "The sentiment is noted. Now, we have a bigger problem. We have a Biodyne researcher and his priceless, off-the-books data shard. We can't just walk up to Rogue's bar. Biodyne will have the afterlife staked out, along with every other known fixer in the city. We're holding the most valuable, and the most dangerous, item in Night City right now. And everyone is going to be looking for the team that took it." The five of them stood in the cramped, smelly sewer tunnel, a motley collection of misfits bound by a single, desperate act. A ghost warrior from another world, a netrunner who lived in the code. A pair of chrome-addicted siblings, and a terrified scientist. Above them, the city hummed with menace, the hunt already beginning. They had won the battle, but the war for their survival had just started. And their unstable, explosive alliance was the only weapon they had left. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Weight of a Soul. The darkness of the sewer was a physical presence. It was a thick, damp blanket woven from the smells of decay, stagnant water, and the metallic tang of old rust. Sound was deadened, reduced to the steady, maddening drip, drip, drip of unseen water. The scuttling of rats in the walls, and the harsh, ragged breathing of five souls trapped in a concrete tomb. The only light was the cold, clinical cyan glow from Lucy's personal link as she interfaced with the city's sewer schematics, and the occasional flicker from a cheap chemical light stick Naruto had cracked, casting their faces in a sickly green pallor. Above them, the city of chrome and broken dreams hummed on. Oblivious, a predator searching for its lost prey. They were a tableau of desperation. Harris, the researcher, had curled into a fetal position against the curved wall. His body racked with tremors that were only partly from the cold. He was a man whose entire world had been intellectual constructs and sterile laboratories, now thrust into a visceral reality of filth and violence. Pilar sat propped against the opposite wall, his face a mask of pale, sweat-sheened pain. His ridiculously oversized chrome hands rested uselessly in his lap, a monument to a bravado that had shattered along with his knee. Rebecca stood over him like a feral gargoyle, her shotgun held at a low ready, her body a coiled spring of rage and anxiety, her wild green eyes darting into the shadows at every sound. Lucy was an island of focused calm, her consciousness half a world away in the digital ether, her fingers making minute, unconscious twitches. And Naruto stood in the center, the fulcrum of their unstable alliance. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, leaving behind the bone-deep weariness of a battle fought and won, and the heavy mantle of responsibility for the battle to come. He felt the weight of their gazes, even in the near darkness. Harris looked to him for salvation. Pilar, for relief from his agony. Rebecca, with a confusing mixture of resentment and a desperate, unspoken plea. And Lucy trusted him to be the shield while she was the sword, to manage the chaotic world of flesh and blood so she could conquer the one of light and code. "Okay, that's it, I've had enough of this shit." Rebecca's voice, raw and ragged, sliced through the quiet. She paced the length of their small section of tunnel, her combat boots splashing in the ankle-deep sludge. We can't just sit here and rot while those Biodyne fucks are turning the city upside down looking for us. We need to move. We need to find another buyer. And walk into whose parlor? Lucy's voice was cool and disembodied, emanating from her still form without a flicker of emotion. Every top-tier fixer in this city works with Rogue. Anyone else reputable will have heard she claimed the contract. Anyone operating outside that circle is either small-time, untrustworthy, or working for a corporation. Selling this shard on the street is like painting a target on our backs and screaming, "I'm here." So what's your brilliant plan, Princess? We camp out with the rats until we starve. Rebecca shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We've got the prize. The whole point of a prize is to collect the fucking prize money. The prize is too hot, Lucy countered, her eyes snapping open, their cyan glow sharp and intense in the gloom. She was back, her full attention crashing into the present. Biodyne didn't just send a retrieval team, they sent a sterilization squad. They're not just trying to recover their property. They're trying to erase its existence, and anyone who knows about it. Before we make a single move, we need to know exactly what we're holding. We need to know the true value of our leverage. Her gaze fell on the data shard, which Harris was still clutching like a holy relic. I need to crack that. No, Harris yelped, scrambling away from Lucy's gaze. You can't. The encryption is military grade, layered with black ice that will fry your nervous system. It's a dead man's switch. Every piece of ice can be broken, Lucy said with the cold confidence of a master craftsman. I can build a sandbox, isolate the core files. It'll take time, and I'll need to be undisturbed. Rebecca let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Time. My brother's leg is busted, we have a panic attack of a scientist on our hands, and there's a corporate hit squad hunting us. Time is the one thing we don't have. She jabbed a finger at Naruto. You're the leader here, right? Mister. My way. What's the play, Skinny? Sit around and hold hands while she plays with her computer and he breaks a goddamn kneecap. The confrontation hung in the air, a lit fuse. It was the critical moment, the point where their fragile alliance would either solidify or shatter completely. Naruto held up a hand, a gesture of calm that seemed to absorb the tension. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We do both, he said, his voice steady and reasonable. Lucy is right. We can't sell what we don't understand. Knowledge isn't just power, it's survival. She needs to crack the shard. He turned his gaze to Rebecca, his blue eye softening with an empathy that was utterly alien to her world. And you're right, too. We can't let your brother suffer. We take care of our own. He moved towards Pilar, his steps sure and steady in the grime. He knelt, ignoring the filth, his attention focused entirely on the injured man. Let me see it. Pilar, who had been watching the exchange with a pained grimace, looked from Naruto to his sister. Rebecca gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. With a groan, Pilar extended his leg. The sight was ugly. The synth flesh of his lower leg was torn away, revealing the metal endoskeleton beneath. But the damage wasn't to the chrome. It was his knee, his organic, human knee. That was the problem. It was swollen to the size of a small melon, purple and misshapen. Naruto's targeted strike, delivered with the precise, debilitating force of a shinobi, had hyperextended the joint, tearing ligaments and likely fracturing the patella. It was a crippling, but not life-threatening, injury. I'm not a doctor, Naruto said quietly, his hands hovering over the injury. But I know battlefield medicine. In his old world, he could have flooded the area with Kurama's healing chakra, mending the tissue in seconds. Now, he had only his knowledge. He began to unwrap the spare bandages he carried, a habit from a lifetime of war. Rebecca watched him, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of suspicion. What the hell do you know about it? Where I come from, we learn to set bones before we learn to break them, Naruto said without looking up. He took a deep breath. This is going to hurt. A lot, but if we don't set it now, you'll lose the leg. Or what's left of it. He looked Pilar directly in the eye. Bite down on something. Pilar, his face ashen, nodded grimly. He ripped a piece of his own leather vest off and shoved it in his mouth. Naruto placed one hand on Pilar's thigh, the other on his shin. On 3, he said. 1, 2. He didn't wait for 3. With a sudden, Powerful, and expertly applied wrench, he snapped the joint back into alignment. Pilar's scream was a muffled, guttural roar of pure agony that echoed horribly in the small space. His whole body convulsed, his oversized chrome hand slamming against the concrete floor, cracking the surface. Rebecca flinched, her hand tightening on her shotgun, a protective instinct warring with the knowledge that this was necessary. Naruto worked quickly, his hands moving with a iced efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. He bound the knee tightly, creating a makeshift splint with a discarded piece of rebar he'd found, immobilizing the joint. The swelling was still terrible, but the limb was straight. He then pressed 2 fingers into a specific point on Pilar's thigh, a pressure point he knew would deaden the nerves and dull the pain. The effect was almost immediate. Pilar's pained grunts softened, his breathing evening out, the tension in his body eased. He slumped back against the wall, exhausted, but the look of raw agony had been replaced by one of weary, grudging respect. "Thanks, Chum," he managed to gasp out around the wad of leather. Naruto simply nodded, wiping his hands on his pants. He stood up and faced Rebecca. She was staring at him, her mouth slightly agape. Her tough-as-nails facade completely gone. In its place was a raw, naked vulnerability she would have killed anyone else for seeing. He hadn't just helped her brother. He had done it with a gentleness and a competence that was utterly at odds with the brutal efficiency he had displayed in combat. He hadn't gloated. He hadn't demanded thanks. He had simply seen a problem and fixed it, because it was the right thing to do. "He'll need a real ripperdoc," Naruto said, his voice soft. "But this will hold. He'll be able to move, with help." Rebecca just stared, speechless. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Yeah," she finally croaked out, looking away, unable to meet his gaze. Right. For the first time, she saw him not as a rival, not as a skinny chum, but as something else entirely. Something she had no name for. Naruto turned to Lucy, who had watched the entire exchange with a silent, analytical intensity. "Your turn," he said. "Do what you do best." Lucy gave him a long, searching look. A new layer of data added to her complex file on the man named Naruto Uzumaki. He wasn't just a tactical asset. He was a leader. He could manage violence and compassion with equal skill. He was the calm eye of the hurricane they found themselves in. She gave a curt nod of her own, the gesture holding a new weight of respect. She turned to Harris. "The shard," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. This time, the terrified researcher complied, handing it over with trembling fingers. Lucy slotted the shard into her personal link, her body going still as she jacked in. "I'm creating a partitioned virtual environment, completely air-gapped from my own core systems," she explained, her voice becoming distant again. "A digital cage. Then I'm going to poke the bear." The next hour passed in near total silence. The only sounds were Pilar's steady breathing, Harris' nervous fidgeting, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum from Lucis' hardware. Naruto sat with his back against the wall, a silent sentinel. Rebecca, after a long internal struggle, sat down near her brother, her shotgun across her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. The anger had leached out of her, replaced by a sullen, confused quiet. She kept glancing at Naruto, a quick, furtive look, as if trying to solve a complex equation that kept giving her the wrong answer. Finally, Lucy let out a sharp gasp. Her eyes flew open, wide with a mixture of shock and triumph. "I'm in," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Sweet Mother of God, I'm in." "What is it?" Naruto asked, immediately alert. What did Harris create? Lucis' gaze was unfocused, staring at something none of them could see. "It's not a weapon. Not a new piece of tech. Not corporate secrets." She looked at them, her cyan eyes glowing with a profound, earth-shattering revelation. "It's a cure." The word dropped into the silence of the sewer like a stone into a deep well. "A cure for what?" Rebecca asked, her voice raspy. "For everything," Lucy breathed, her mind clearly reeling from what she was seeing. "For the thing that makes this city what it is. It's a stable, neuro-regenerative biochemical agent bind with a series of adaptive nano-machines. It doesn't just suppress the effects of cyberware incompatibility. It reverses them. It repairs the neural damage. It heals the mind." Her voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a sense of awe that bordered on religious. He's found a cure for cyberpsychosis. The implications of her words crashed over them like a tidal wave. A cure for the psychosis that was the boogeyman of Night City. The inevitable end for so many who pushed their chrome too far. A disease that had shaped their society, their laws, their fears. It was the Holy Grail, a secret that corporations would kill for. That people would die for. It was supposed to be a side project, Harris stammered, finding his voice. A theoretical exercise. But it worked. The animal trials were flawless. Biodyne found out. They didn't want a cure. A cure is a one-time payment. They wanted a treatment, a subscription model, something they could bleed the city dry with for the rest of time. When I wouldn't play along, they tried to take it. I ran. Suddenly, it all made sense. The sterilization squad, the desperation. This wasn't about a few lost eddies. This was about controlling the future. Lucy's gaze snapped to Naruto. Her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning comprehension. Your immunity, she said, her voice barely audible. The Sandevistan on your spine. Vic said it should have turned your brain to soup. But it hasn't. This is somehow related to you. You are the impossible variable, Naruto. The walking, talking proof that it's possible. He was no longer just a warrior with a strange power. He was the living embodiment of the secret they now held. A cure for the city's soul, a soul he didn't even know it had lost. Rebecca looked from the shard in Lucy's hand to Naruto, her mind so used to thinking in terms of money and violence, struggling to grasp the sheer scale of this new reality. What is that thing worth? She asked, the question sounding small and childish in the face of the revelation. You can't put a price on this, Lucy said, her voice filled with a strange reverence. This isn't about eddies anymore. This is about changing the world. The five of them sat in the darkness, the weight of their discovery settling upon them. They were no longer just a mismatched crew of mercs trying to score a payday. They were the custodians of a miracle. And in a city built on the predictable cycle of ambition and despair, a miracle was the most dangerous thing you could possibly possess. The choice was no longer about which fixer to see, or how to fence their prize. The choice was now infinitely larger, infinitely more terrifying. What do you do with the power to save a city that has never done anything but try to kill you? Naruto looked at each of their faces, illuminated in the dying green glow of the light stick. He saw fear, greed, awe, and confusion. He saw the broken, desperate heart of Night City, reflected in the eyes of his new, unwilling comrades. The path forward was no longer clear. It was a dark, treacherous road with no map. He finally broke the silence, his voice calm and steady, a single point of certainty in a world that had just been turned upside down. So, he said, looking at each of them in turn, the question carrying the weight of all their futures. What do we do now? Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Sanctuary of Scars. The sewer's oppressive silence was shattered, replaced by the frantic, overlapping sound of five minds trying to process a reality that had fundamentally fractured. A cure for cyberpsychosis. It wasn't just a concept. It was a tangible thing, a string of data on a silver shard held in Lucy's hand, and its implications radiated outwards, warping the very fabric of their world. We sell it, Rebecca blurted out, her voice a harsh rasp that was part greed, part desperation. She was pacing again, the motion a physical manifestation of her racing thoughts. Forget Rogue. Forget the small-time fixers. We go to the top. We go to Militech. Her eyes had a wild, feverish gleam. Think about it. This is the ultimate corporate weapon. Militech could use this to make their soldiers invincible. I am immune to the one thing that limits Chrome. They could wipe Arasaka off the map. They would pay. Gods, they would pay anything. We could all disappear, live like kings on our own private island. And trade one set of corporate overlords for another. Lucy retorted, her voice sharp as broken glass. She had risen to her feet, placing herself between Rebecca and the terrified Harris, a protective Jess. Toure that was as instinctual as breathing. We hand Militech the key to perfect super soldiers and trust them to just give us a nice retirement package. They would kill us the second the transfer was complete to ensure the secret stays theirs alone. This is bigger than Eddie's, Rebecca. It's bigger than a corporate war. Then what? Rebecca wheeled on her, her face contorted. We release it for free on the net. Post it on some forum and let the whole world have it. Biodyne and Arasaka would just deploy net wipers to scrub it from existence in an hour and hunt us down for the original. You can. Fight a megacorp with a goddamn press release. She's right, Harris whimpered from his corner, his voice barely audible. It's too dangerous. We should destroy it. Erase it completely. It's the only way to be safe. Pilar, leaning heavily against the wall, shook his head. No way, Chum. After all this, we're not walking away with nothing. He looked to his sister, his loyalty unwavering, but then his gaze shifted to Naruto. A flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The arguments swirled around Naruto, a vortex of fear, greed, and flawed idealism. They were all trapped in the Night City mindset, seeing the problem only through the lens of power, profit, and survival. He held up a hand, and once again, the sheer, quiet authority in the gesture silenced them. He walked over to the shivering researcher and knelt, bringing himself level with the man. His voice was not commanding, but gentle, disarming. Harris, you created this. What did you want it to be? Harris looked up, startled by the direct, personal question. I don't know. I was a researcher. It was a problem to be solved. When I saw what it could do, I thought of the people. The ones who go too far, who lose themselves. The families torn apart. I thought it could help them. His voice cracked. But the world doesn't want to help people. It wants to control them. Naruto nodded slowly, the man's words resonating with a deep, familiar pain. He had fought a war to save a world that often seemed intent on its own destruction. He stood and faced the others, his resolve hardening into something solid and unbreakable in the gloom. He's right. This isn't a weapon. It isn't a payday. It's a second chance. And we are not going to give it to the people who broke the world in the first place. He looked directly at Rebecca, his blue eye holding no judgment. Only conviction. Your plan gets us killed. Lucis' plan gets the cure erased. And Harris' plan lets the sickness win. So what's left, oh great leader? Rebecca asked, the sarcasm in her voice thin and brittle. We get smart. We get safe. And we find a way to deliver the cure, not to the corporations, but to the people who need it, Naruto stated. And the first step is getting out of this sewer. Pilar needs a real doctor. Harris needs a safe place to hide. And Lucy needs a secure place to work, somewhere off the grid. There's only one person I can think of that we can trust. Lucis' eyes widened slightly in understanding. Victor. The Ripperdoc. Rebecca scoffed. He's good with a scalpel, but he's just one man. Biodyne will tear his clinic apart. Vic's clinic is his fortress. And he's more than just a Ripperdoc, he's a fixture of the underworld. He has connections we don't, Naruto countered. More importantly, he has integrity. He keeps his word. He turned to Lucy. Can you copy the essential data? Make a backup we can hide. We can't move through the city with the original. It's too much of a risk. Lucy nodded, her focus returning. Quote, I can encrypt a copy and upload it to a dead drop server hidden in the old net infrastructure. It'll be invisible unless you have the specific quantum key, which only I will hold. The original shard, we can hide that somewhere else. A physical separation of components. It was a classic espionage tactic, one Naruto understood immediately. Good, he said. Do it. Rebecca, you and I are on guard. And we're carrying Pilar. The next 30 minutes were a hive of tense activity. Lucis' fingers flew across a holographic interface, her mind deep in the complex architecture of data encryption. Naruto and Rebecca stood back to back, their senses straining, listening for any sign of Biodyne patrols in the tunnels around them. A new dynamic was forming between them. The animosity had been replaced by grudging, professional respect. She saw the way he moved, the way he listened, the way his body was a perfectly balanced instrument of awareness. He saw the fire in her, not as recklessness, but as a fierce, protective loyalty that he could understand, even respect. When Lucy was finished, they were ready. Naruto and Rebecca created a makeshift chair with their arms to carry Pilar, whose face was tight with pain but stoic. Lucy led the way, a map of the Undercity's maintenance tunnels glowing on her datapad. Harris, a ghost in their wake, scrambled to keep up. Their journey through the sea, Ty's metal and concrete guts was a masterclass in stealth and tension. They moved through reeking sewer lines, ancient, humming maintenance corridors, and the cavernous, forgotten spaces between the megabuildings. Twice, they froze as the synchronized, heavy footfalls of Biodyne patrols passed in a perpendicular tunnel, their helmet-mounted lights cutting sharp, sterile beams through the darkness. During one of these enforced halts, pressed into a narrow, filthy alcove, Naruto felt Rebecca tremble slightly beside him. It wasn't fear, it was a contained, vibrating rage. "I hate this," she whispered, her voice so low it was barely a breath. "Skulking like rats. I'd rather go out fighting." "Fighting gets you killed," Naruto whispered back, his eyes fixed on the passing patrol. "Surviving lets you choose the next fight." She glanced at him in the darkness, at the calm certainty of his profile. He wasn't afraid. He was patient. He was a hunter, not just a brawler. "How are you so calm?" she asked, the question genuine. "You've seen what that thing on your back can do. We could tear right through them." "Power is a tool," he replied, the memory of his master Jiraiya's words echoing across dimensions. "Using it is easy. Knowing when to use it, that's the hard part." The patrol passed. He gave the signal, and they moved on, Rebecca's mind grappling with a new, alien concept: restraint. Victor's clinic was a beacon of light and antiseptic cleanliness after the filth of the sewers. They stumbled in through the back entrance, a grime-caked, haggard-looking group of fugitives. Vic was working on a client's optic, but he took one look at their faces, at Pilar's leg, and immediately sent his paying customer out the door with a grunted apology. "Mother of God," he rumbled, his own M.'s matched optics widening as he took in the scene. Rogue's little extraction job went sideways, I take it. "You could say that," Lucy said dryly. Vic didn't waste time with questions. He immediately guided them towards his operating theater, a sterile, chrome-plated room that was his inner sanctum. "Get him on the table," he ordered, his professional demeanor taking over. "The rest of you, stay here. And don't touch anything." For the next hour, the four of them waited in the main clinic area. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of Vic's medical equipment from the next room. Harris had found a corner and resumed his silent, terrified vigil. Lucy had jacked into Vic's system, with his permission, and was monitoring the city's data streams, her face a mask of concentration. Naruto and Rebecca stood near the entrance to the operating room, a silent, unspoken guard. "He's good," Rebecca said quietly, breaking the silence. It was the closest she could come to admitting she was worried. "He's the best," Naruto affirmed. "That's why we came here." She finally turned to face him, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. Her usual aggressive posture was gone, replaced by a weary curiosity. "You really believe all that stuff you said back there, don't you? Helping people, choosing the fight. Nobody in this city talks like that. Nobody thinks like that." "Maybe they should," he said simply. "Why?" she challenged. "What has this city, what has anyone, ever done to deserve that? It's a grinder. It chews you up and spits you out. The only way to survive is to be the one with the sharpest teeth." "I've seen grinders before," Naruto said, his gaze turning distant, his mind flashing back to the horrors of the Fourth Great Ninja War. "I've seen worlds chew people up. But I've also seen people fight back. Not for money, or power, but for each other. For their homes. For a belief that things can be better." He looked back at her, his eye holding a deep, found sincerity that was impossible to fake. "That's the only fight that's ever worth a damn." Rebecca stared at him, completely thrown. She had no response. The cynical armor she had worn her entire life. The armor that had protected her in the brutal streets of Night City, was being systematically dismantled, not by force, but by a philosophy so fundamentally alien that she couldn't find a defense against it. The door to the operating room hissed open. Vic emerged, pulling off a pair of blood-stained gloves. His face was grim, but his voice was steady. "The knee is stabilized. I repaired the torn ligaments and set the fracture with polymer binders. He'll be off his feet for a while, and he'll need physical therapy, but he'll walk again. He's resting now." Rebecca let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A wave of relief washing over her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. "Thanks, Doc," she mumbled. "Seriously." Vic just grunted in response, already turning his attention to the rest of them. "All right, Now you're going to tell me exactly what kind of hell you've kicked over, and why Biodyne's internal security memos are suddenly screaming about a top priority asset retrieval. Classified at the highest level. In the sterile confines of the clinic, under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, Lucy laid it all out. She told him about the shard, about Harris research. She told him about the cure. As she spoke, Victor, the grizzled, cynical, seen-it-all Ripperdoc, underwent a transformation. He sat down heavily on a stool, his head in his hands. He ran his chrome fingers through his thinning hair. When Lucy finished, he was silent for a long, long time. He finally looked up, and the look in his eyes was one Naruto hadn't seen before. It wasn't just our shock. It was a deep, painful, and very personal hope. Vic had spent decades patching up the victims of Night City's chrome addiction. He had held the hands of mercs as they spiraled into cyberpsychosis. Their minds shattering like glass. He had seen the human cost of this city's relentless pursuit of self-modification firsthand. A cure, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at his own hands. One of flesh, one of metal. Do you have any idea what this means? He looked at Naruto, then at Harris. This isn't just a corporate asset. This is redemption. For all of us. He stood, his purpose renewed, his weariness replaced by a fierce, protective energy. All right, this changes the game. This clinic is now your base of operations. My systems are shielded, my location known but respected. It's the safest place you can be in this city right now. Harris, you stay in the back. No one sees you. Lucy, you have full access to my servers. Rebecca, you and your brother are my patients. No one will question that. He looked at Naruto, a new level of understanding and respect in his gaze. And you are the key. Your immunity, this strange power of yours, it's all connected. We need a plan, a real one, not just how to survive, but how to use this miracle. For the first time since they had fled the no-tell motel, there was a sense of stability, of sanctuary. They were no longer just running. They had a base. They had a powerful, trustworthy ally. They had a moment to breathe. Vic, in a gesture of hospitality that felt monumental, went to his personal food synthesizer and produced not nutrient paste, but steaming bowls of real, savory ramen, a luxury in this part of town. The six of them, the ghost, the netrunner, the firecracker, the broken brute, the terrified genius, and the scarred doctor, sat together in the small clinic, a bizarre and broken family united by a secret that could save their world, or burn it to the ground. As Naruto ate the ramen, the familiar taste was a ghost on his tongue, a bittersweet echo of a life he had lost. But as he looked at the faces around him, he felt something else. Not the grief of what was gone, but the weight of what was here. This was his team now. This was his mission. He had been a stranger, a ghost in their machine. But now, he was a part of it. And he would not let it break. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whispers in the datastream. The week that followed was a strange period of calm in the eye of a hurricane. Victor's clinic became their world, a sterile, chrome and steel sanctuary. Sealed against the ravenous beast of Night City. The rhythm of their lives slowed, governed not by the frantic pulse of survival, but by the steady, deliberate beats of planning, healing, and preparation. The outside world, with its neon-drenched violence and corporate assassins, felt distant, a story told through the filtered data streams Lucy monitored from her new command center in Vic's server room. Biodyne hadn't gone quiet. Far from it. Their internal comms, which Lucy monitored with the silent efficiency of a spider on a web, were buzzing. They had locked down the city's official channels, feeding the media a sanitized story about a contained gang war in Pacifica. But in the shadows of the underworld, the truth was spreading. Rogue had put out the word. The Harris contract was off the books, but a new, astronomically high bounty had been placed by an anonymous corporate client for any information leading to the recovery of a stolen medical prototype. Every fixer, merc, and scavenger in the city was on the hunt, sniffing the air for the scent of eddies. The ghost team who had hit the no-tell motel and vanished without a trace was quickly becoming the stuff of legend. Pilar's recovery was a central focus. Under Vic's expert care, his body began to mend. The Ripperdoc replaced Naruto's makeshift splint with a state-of-the-art orthopedic brace, and Pilar began a grueling regimen of physical therapy. It was during these sessions that Naruto and Pilar forged an unlikely bond. Naruto, drawing on the rehabilitation exercises from his own past injuries, would work with the hulking merc, pushing him, encouraging him. "You're relying too much on the chrome," Naruto said one afternoon, watching as Pilar struggled to put weight on his injured leg, his massive cybernetic arms doing most of the work. "Your body has to remember how to be strong, not just your arms." Pilar grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Easy for you to say, Chum. You got that fancy God mode button on your spine. Me, I got these," he said, gesturing with his oversized fists. "They're for punching, not ballet. Every part of you is a weapon," Naruto countered, tapping his own temple. "Especially this one. Your strength isn't just in your fists, it's in your will. Now, again, focus. Feel the muscle, not the metal." Slowly, painstakingly, Pilar began to listen. He started to see Naruto not just as the skinny chum who crippled him, but as someone who understood the mechanics of a fighter's body in a way he never had. The respect that had been born in the sewer tunnel began to grow into a tentative friendship. Rebecca watched these sessions from a distance, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and frustration. She was a creature of action, and the enforced downtime was grating on her. Her energy, usually expended in a maelstrom of violence, had nowhere to go. She spent her days meticulously cleaning her shotgun, running combat diagnostics, and pacing the confines of the clinic like a caged tiger. Her interactions with Naruto were clipped, almost combative, yet laced with a new, unspoken current. She would challenge his ideas, question his motives, but she would also listen. She saw the way he treated her brother, the way he respected Vic, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. She saw him training alone in the pre-dawn hours in the clinic's small back alley. His single arm a blur of motion as he practiced his katas, the movements fluid and deadly. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a contradiction to everything she knew about strength and power, and it was driving her mad. One evening, she found him on the roof of the clinic, staring out at the cityscape, a lone silhouette against the perpetual neon twilight. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice less abrasive than usual. "Too quiet up here," he replied, not looking at her. "I'm used to the sounds of a forest at night. This city, it never rests. But it's a dead kind of noise." She stood beside him, following his gaze. "You miss it, don't you? You're home." It wasn't a question meant to pry, it was a simple statement of fact. He nodded slowly. "More than I can say." He looked at her then, his blue eyes seeming to see right through her tough girl facade. "What about you? You and Pilar, you ever think about getting out? Finding a quiet place?" Rebecca let out a short, harsh laugh. "This is the quiet place, Skinny. This city is all we've ever had. We were born in the gutter of this town, orphans since we were kids. Afterlife, Chrome, the next gig, that's the dream. There's nothing else." Her voice was brittle, a defense against a vulnerability she rarely showed. "There's always something else," Naruto said softly. "You just have to be brave enough to look for it." She had no answer for that. She just stood beside him, watching the flying cars scream between the buildings, the silence between them more meaningful than any conversation they'd had before. She was beginning to reel. Eyes that the something else he spoke of wasn't a place. It was a state of mind. A state of being she had never considered possible. Meanwhile, Lucy and Harris were engaged in a different kind of battle. In the secure server room, they worked tirelessly on the cure. Harris, finding a new sense of purpose under Vic's protection, had shed his terrified victim persona and re-emerged as the brilliant scientist he was. He guided Lucy through the labyrinthine data of his research, explaining the complex biochemistry and the delicate dance of the nano-machines. Lucy, in turn, was his shield and his scalpel in the digital world. She took his raw, theoretical data and began to weaponize it, not for violence, but for delivery. "The problem isn't just releasing the cure," she explained to the group during one of their nightly strategy sessions. "The problem is making it accessible. We can't just dump the formula on the net. Biodyne would squash it. We need a delivery system. Something that can't be traced, can't be shut down, and can reach the people who need it most, not the ones who can afford it." Her solution was elegant and audacious. We're not going to release the cure. We're going to release the symptoms of the cure. She brought up a holographic display, showing a complex viral code. I'm piggybacking the nano-machine deployment sequence onto a common, low-level data worm that infects the city's public data terminals and ad-hoarding software. It's harmless, something most people's personal cyberware filters out every day. But once inside a user's system, it will cross-refer, hence their public health records and cyberware registration. If a user is flagged as being at high risk for cyberpsychosis, the worm will activate a single, encrypted microburst transmission. A transmission to where? Vic asked, leaning in, fascinated. To us, Lucy said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Or rather, to a network of anonymous, disposable, burner, ripperdocs who we will recruit and supply. The transmission will contain the patient's location and medical profile. Our chosen docs can then administer the cure discreetly, pro bono. We build a grassroots network of healing, an underground railroad for the mind. Funded by our own side hustles. We don't cure the city with a tidal wave, we do it one drop of rain at a time. It was brilliant, it was decentralized, it was untraceable, it was, as Naruto noted, a shinobi's solution. But to fund this underground railroad, they needed capital. And that meant taking risks. I've been scanning the fixer boards, Lucy announced, her expression turning serious. Looking for the right kind of work. High risk, high reward, but gigs that don't attract direct corporate attention. And I've found one. She pulled up a new file. It was a NTRACT from a mid-level fixer known as Padre, over in Haywood. The target was a data vault belonging to a sleazy media mogul named Caden Cole, who was blackmailing a local politician. The job was to infiltrate Cole's penthouse, wipe the blackmail material, and retrieve some sensitive financial records. It's clean, it's targeted, and it pays well, Lucy said. But the penthouse has state-of-the-art security, both physical and digital. It's a two-person job. A netrunner and an infiltration specialist. All eyes turned to Naruto. He had become their ghost, their blade in the dark. I'll do it, he said without hesitation. You'll need backup, Rebecca immediately interjected. You can't just walk in the front door. She's right, Lucy agreed. I can handle the net security from a distance. But you'll need someone on the ground to run interference. Someone who can blend in at a high society party Cole is throwing tonight. Someone who can create a distraction if things go south. Rebecca's eyes lit up. A party. A chance to get out of the clinic, to do something. I'll go. Lucy and Vic exchanged a look. Rebecca was a firecracker, not exactly the subtle type for a high society infiltration. Your brother still needs, Vic started to say. Pilar is fine here with you. Rebecca cut him off, her gaze fixed on Naruto, a challenge in her eyes. You need a distraction. I am a distraction. Besides, you owe me one, Skinny. Let me have some fun. Naruto considered it. Her plan at the no-tell motel had been reckless, but she had also proven she could be a magnet for attention when needed. And he saw the desperate need in her eyes, the plea for action, for purpose. Keeping a caged tiger caged for too long was dangerous. All right, he agreed, a small smile touching his lips. But you follow my lead. We do this my way. Quietly, Rebecca's face split into a wide, manic grin. Quietly, she repeated, her tone suggesting the word meant something entirely different to her. You got it, boss. Caden Cole's penthouse was a monument to gaudy excess, a glass and chrome tumor at the very top of a towering Haywood skyscraper. The party was in full swing, a throbbing mass of the city's elite, corporate suits, brained and stars. Media personalities, all mingling, drinking, and basking in their own manufactured importance. Rebecca, to Naruto's surprise, cleaned up remarkably well. Vic had procured some high-end clothes for her. A sleek, black cocktail dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and dangerous. Her pink and blue hair was styled, her usual scowl replaced by a passable, if slightly predatory, smile. She moved through the crowd with a surprising amount of grace, a glass of champagne in her hand, her eyes scanning everything. She looked like she belonged, a shark swimming among other sharks. Naruto, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. He was clinging to the outside of the building, 100 stories up, the wind whipping at his dark clothing. He had bypassed the party entirely. using the maintenance shafts on the building's exterior to climb to the penthouse level. His target was the server room, located on the floor directly below the main party. "All right, Ghost, I'm in the building's network." Lucis' voice came through his comm, a calm anchor in the howling wind. "Security on your level is active. Laser grids, pressure plates, and a nasty-looking Militech combat drone on patrol. I can loop the camera feeds, but you'll have to dance around the rest." "Just tell me the steps," Naruto whispered back, pressing himself flat against the cold glass as the combat drone whirred past a window on the other side. He pried open a ventilation grate and slipped inside, his movements silent and fluid. The interior of the ventilation shaft was a maze of wires and ducts, but his shinobi senses, honed over a lifetime of infiltration, guided him. He moved through the building's guts like a phantom. "Laser grid ahead," Lucy warned. "Standard red beam array. You can see it with your optic." Naruto activated his cybernetic eyes' enhanced vision. A complex web of brilliant red lines materialized in the corridor ahead. It was an impassable wall of light. For anyone else, he didn't try to contort his body through the gaps. He simply stood at the edge, took a deep breath, and activated the divine Sandevistan. The world dissolved into a silent, stretched-out painting of red lines. The patrol drone, at the far end of the hall, was a frozen statue. Naruto walked. He moved through the laser grid with the calm, unhurried grace of a man taking a stroll through a park. His body weaving between the beams of light with inches to spare. It wasn't a feat of agility, it was a feat of absolute temporal dominance. He reached the other side, deactivated the Sandevistan, and the world snapped back into its noisy, frantic reality. He hadn't just bypassed the security, he had made it irrelevant. He reached the server room door. It was a thick slab of reinforced steel with a biometric hand scanner. "This one's tricky," Lucy said. "The scanner is tied to Cole's personal biometrics. I can't fake it, but I can create a temporary system crash. It'll default the lock to its emergency manual override. It's a physical tumbler lock. Old school. You'll have to pick it." "No problem," Naruto murmured. From a small pouch on his belt, he produced a set of thin, delicate metal lockpicks. Another skill from a lifelong past, one he hadn't expected to use in this world of digital ghosts and electronic keys. "All right, crashing the system, now," Lucy said. The light on the scanner flickered and died. A small, circular keyhole was revealed. Naruto went to work, his fingers nimble and sure. The tumblers clicked into place with satisfying precision. The heavy door swung open. The server room was cold and dark. The only light the blinking LEDs on racks of humming machines. He found the central terminal, the one housing the blackmail material. "Jack me in," Lucy commanded. Naruto pulled a thin cable from his pouch and plugged it into the terminal, linking it to his own personal comms. He became Lucy's physical avatar in the room. He could feel her presence now, a rush of cold, focused energy flowing through the connection. "I'm in," she whispered. "The files are protected by a demon, a nasty piece of work. A digital guard dog. I have to fight it." In the real world, Naruto stood guard. In the digital world, Lucy was at war. He could hear the faint, distorted sounds of the battle through his comms, the shriek of breaking code, the roar of countermeasures, Lucy's sharp, muttered commands as she deployed her own demons, her ice picks of code chipping away at the fortress wall of Cole's security. Suddenly, a new alert blared in his ear. It was from Rebecca. "Naruto, we've got a problem. Cole's making a move. He's taking the politician into his private study. The one right next to the server room. If he tries to access the files while Lucy's in there, the feedback will fry her brain." Naruto cursed under his breath. He had to stop them. He had to create a distraction. A real one. Now, he looked at the server racks, at the blinking lights, at the mass IV power conduit running along the ceiling. A reckless, chaotic, and very Rebecca-esque idea sparked in his mind. "Rebecca," he said into his comm, a grim smile on his face. "Get ready for some fireworks." Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The cacophony of a whisper. The world outside the server room was a symphony of manufactured calm. The gentle thrum of the penthouse's climate control, the distant, muffled bass of the party music. The clink of glasses. Inside, for Naruto, there was only the frantic whisper of Lucy in his head, the roar of a digital war, and the ticking of a 90-second clock. He had no time for subtlety. He needed a shout. He needed an earthquake. "Rebecca," he sub-vocalized, his voice a blade of pure focus, "I'm creating the diversion now. Don't ask questions. Just amplify it. Make it your masterpiece." He didn't wait for a reply. He took one step back from the server rack, his eyes tracing the thick, insulated power conduit that ran along the ceiling like a great metal artery, feeding the lifeblood of electricity to this entire section of the penthouse. He crouched, his body coiling like a spring, gathering not chakra, but pure, kinetic potential. Then, he unleashed the god in his spine. The divine Sandevistan engaged not with a roar, but with a profound, internal silence. The world bled of its speed. The blinking LEDs on the servers became solid, unblinking eyes of red and green. The low hum of the machines stretched into a bass note so deep it was felt more than heard. In this silent, frozen world of stretched time, Naruto leapt. His ascent was a graceful, controlled arc. He was not just fast. He was a sculptor of moments, and he had given himself an eternity to work. His chrome hand, the simple, functional prosthetic from Vic, shot out. It wasn't a wild punch. It was a precise, surgical strike, delivered with the full, focused force of his body. His metallic knuckles connected with a specific, load-bearing joint on the conduit's mounting bracket. It was the perfect application of force to the perfect weak point. A single, critical domino. Time crashed back into its chaotic, unforgiving rhythm with the sound of tearing metal. The conduit, its primary support shattered, ripped free from the ceiling. It didn't just fall. It whipped downwards like a striking serpent, its multi-ton weight wrenching it from its connections. The air exploded with a blinding, blue-white flash as 1,000,000 volts of raw power were unleashed. A deafening crack boom shook the skyscraper to its foundations, a sound that was simultaneously an explosion and an electrical discharge of apocalyptic scale. Every light in the penthouse, every monitor, every speaker, every piece of technology, instantly died. The world was plunged into absolute, disorienting darkness and a silence broken only by the sudden, panicked screams of the party guests. A powerful electromagnetic pulse washed through the floor, turning every piece of delicate electronics in the vicinity into a useless brick. Naruto was already moving. The EMP had no effect on the strange, quasi-biological hardware in his spine, and his cybernetic eye, hardened by Vic for just such an eventuality, flick. Read once before rebooting on its own internal power cell. He was a ghost in a blackout of his own making, the apex predator in an environment he now controlled. Out on the main party floor, Rebecca felt the floor shudder beneath her heels a split second before the world went black. Naruto's voice, "Make it your masterpiece," was still echoing in her head. A wide, wicked grin spread across her face in the sudden, total darkness. This was her kind of party. Panic erupted around her. The city's elite, so used to their controlled, perfect world, were reduced to scared, shrieking children in the dark. A few emergency lights, powered by independent batteries, flickered on, casting long, terrifying shadows and revealing a scene of utter chaos. People were stumbling, falling, shouting. Rebecca didn't stumble, she thrived. "Oh my God, did you feel that?" she shrieked, her voice a perfect imitation of a panicked socialite. She, accidentally, stumbled sideways, shoving a portly corporate vice president with a loud gasp. The man tumbled into a table laden with hors d'oeuvres, sending a shower of expensive food and broken glass across the floor. Security guards, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, were trying to restore order, their voices shouting useless commands like, "Remain calm." And, "Everything is under control." Rebecca saw her opening. Caden Cole's personal bodyguards, 2 mountains of muscle and chrome, were moving from their post outside his study, their attention drawn to the chaos in the main room. They were trying to protect their boss from the imagined threat of a terrorist attack. Not from a single ghost in his server room. Masterpiece, she thought, her grin widening. She spotted her target. A massive, hideous ice sculpture of a swan, the party's centerpiece. With another theatrical scream, she flung herself backwards as if pushed by the unseen crowd. Her back hit the sculpture's pedestal. The entire structure, already unstable from the explosion, wobbled precariously. "It's falling," she screamed, pointing. It was the spark the fire needed. The crowd surged away from the sculpture, creating a stampede. The guards, their attention completely diverted, moved to try and control the new wave of panic. With a final groan of cracking ice, the swan sculpture toppled over, shattering on the marble floor in a cataclysmic crash that was far louder and more dramatic than Naruto's initial explosion. In the ensuing madness, no one noticed the two bodyguards being drawn further and further away from the study. No one noticed the slim girl in the black drive slip away from the chaos she had orchestrated, melting into the shadows near the corridor that led to Cole's private wing. She leaned against the wall, took a calm sip of the champagne she'd somehow managed to keep through the ordeal, and listened. She had done her part. The stage was now Naruto's. The power surge that plunged the penthouse into darkness was a tsunami of raw, chaotic data in the net. For Lucy, it was like being caught in a digital earthquake. Her connection flickered violently, her senses assaulted by a scream of static and corrupted code. Naruto. Massive energy spike. What did you? Her frantic voice cut out in his calm. The demon she was fighting, the digital guard dog, reacted to the surge like a wounded animal. The ordered patterns of its attack matrix shattered. It went feral, corrupted. Fragmented subroutines lashed out blindly, walls of black ice appearing and disappearing at random. It was no longer a chess match. It was a knife fight in a collapsing building. Lucy grit her teeth, her mind racing at a speed that would have melted a normal brain. She was in a hostile, unstable environment, but she was a creature of the net. This was her home turf. System unstable, she muttered to herself in the server room at Vic's clinic, her body rigid in its chair. Demon is fragmented. Predictable patterns are gone. It's bleeding data. It was a risk. A huge one. A direct assault was suicide. But in the demon's death throes, it was leaving openings. Tiny, momentary security flaws as its code unraveled. She couldn't fight it head on. She had to dance with it. She abandoned her own attack demons and focused entirely on defense, weaving through the storm of corrupted code, her own ice picks flashing, not to attack, but to parry. She wasn't trying to kill the demon anymore. She was simply trying to survive long enough to reach its heart, the data core where the blackmail files were stored. It was like trying to pick a lock in the middle of a hurricane. But it was the only path forward. In the pitch-black corridor outside the server room, Naruto moved with absolute silence. The door to Cole's study was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light from a battery-powered desk lamp spilling out. He could hear voices from within. The hell was that? It was Caden Cole's voice, sharp and angry. Get the private guard in here now. Lock this room down. Sir, the comms are dead. A second voice replied, trembling. The politician. The door won't lock, the power is out. This was his moment. Naruto didn't kick the door in. He didn't burst in with weapons drawn. He simply pushed the door open and stepped inside, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. The two men spun around, their faces illuminated by the single desk lamp. Caden Cole was a man who practically oozed arrogance, dressed in a ridiculously expensive suit. The politician was a pale, sweating mess. They both froze, their eyes wide, as they saw the figure standing in the doorway. Naruto was wearing simple black gear, his face obscured by the darkness, his single blue cyber optic glowing with a soft, cold light. He didn't look like a common thug. He looked like something from a ghost story. A corporate assassin from the tales they told to frighten junior executives. Cole, Naruto said, his voice a low, calm whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. The party's over. Cole, recovering his bravado, sneered. Who the hell are you? My security will be here in seconds. You've just signed your own death warrant. Your security is busy, Naruto replied, taking a slow step into the room. They're enjoying the ice sculpture. He let that sink in for a moment. He knew. He was everywhere. As for who I am, I'm the man who owns the data shard from your Taki Oshi smuggling op in Kabuki. The one you acquired through a shell corp last week. The blood drained from Cole's face. That was an anonymous, black market deal. Impossible for anyone to know. Naruto's gaze shifted to the terrified politician. Councilman Davies. The financial records showing your contributions from Caden Cole's shell companies have also been relocated. Along with the Braindon CE recording of your indiscretion at the Dark Matter Club last month. Davies looked like he was going to faint. "This is impossible," Cole stammered, his arrogance crumbling. "My system is impenetrable. Everything can be broken," Naruto said, echoing Lucis' words. He took another step, his presence filling the room, sucking all the air out of it. "Your blackmail material on Councilman Davies is being erased as we speak. The financial records are now in our possession. You are going to transfer a substantial severance package to an anonymous account I provide. You are going to do this because the alternative is for your entire criminal enterprise, every dirty deal and black market acquisition, to be leaked to every news outlet and corporate rival in the city. Your empire will be ashes by morning." He wasn't just a ghost. He was a reckoning. At that exact moment, a soft chime came from Cole's desktop terminal as the building's emergency backup generators finally kicked in. The main lights flickered on, flooding the room with harsh, sterile light. On the terminal screen, a single message was displayed in plain, block text. "Data wipe complete. Have a nice day," followed by a string of numbers, an untraceable cred account. Cole stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. He had been completely, surgically dismantled in less than 5 minutes. "Naruto, it's done." Lucis' voice, triumphant and exhausted, burst through his calm. "I have the financials. I'm out." Naruto gave Cole one last, cold look. "Pay the man," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the study, melting back into the corridors just as the first of the confused security guards began to make their way back down the hall. He met Rebecca near a service elevator at the far end of the penthouse. She had ditched the champagne glass and was leaning against the wall, looking for all the world like a bored guest who had wandered away from the noise. She gave him a slow, appraising look, a genuine, dazzling smile spreading across her face. "My masterpiece?" she asked, a playful challenge in her voice. "You're a natural disaster," Naruto replied, a hint of admiration in his tone. It was perfect. Her smile widened. The compliment, coming from him, landed with a surprising weight. They squeezed into the service elevator, the doors hissing shut, sealing them away from the chaos they had wrought. The tension of the mission broke, replaced by the giddy, electric hum of victory. "You know," she said, her voice dropping a little, her eyes sparkling in the dim light of the elevator, "for a guy who likes to be quiet. You make a hell of a lot of noise." "I'm learning from the best," he said, and for the first time, he met her grin with a small, genuine one of his own. They returned to the clinic just before dawn. 2 victorious ghosts returning to their sanctuary. They transferred the eddies from Cole, a handsome sum that would be the first major deposit into their cure fund. They had done it. They had taken on the city's elite on their own turf and won. Later, as the clinic settled into the quiet hours of the morning, Rebecca found herself unable to sleep. She walked past the medical bay and saw Naruto talking quietly with her brother. Pilar was laughing, a real, genuine laugh, as Naruto told him some ridiculous story. She stood in the shadows, watching. She saw the man who had crippled her brother. The ghost who had faced down a corporate mogul without blinking, the warrior who could move faster than time. And she saw the man who was now patiently explaining a physical therapy exercise to her brother. Making him laugh, treating him with a kindness and respect Pilar had rarely known. Her hand went to her own chest, feeling the frantic, unfamiliar beat of her own heart. The skinny chun from another world wasn't a puzzle anymore. He was something far more dangerous, far more complicated. And as she watched him, she had the terrifying, exhilarating thought that for the first time in her life, she didn't want to just win a fight or score a payday. She wanted to be a part of whatever he was building. She wanted to be a part of his world. And that scared her more than any corporate death squad ever could. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.